Okay. All right. Welcome. Uh-oh. Welcome to the second episode of the Rogue Council. This is episode 2, talking about episode 1 of Star Wars, The Phantom Menace. We are live from my parents' basement in Georgia. We are not streaming together or separately. But yeah, I am super pumped to talk about this because,
pop out chat this?
Oh no, chat. Sorry, yeah, chat will be in StreamYard.
Oh wow, I'm such a primitive life form, as
It's
Palpatine
okay.
would say. Okay. Where am I blind? Hey guys, I'm Higo Damask 27, and we're gonna talk about Phantom Menace, as what Chase said.
You can follow me on TikTok at Forward Into the Black. You can also follow me on YouTube and Twitch. I am primarily on TikTok though. As we are here live, we can make it also live. We can chat with ourselves. How did you feel rewatching The Phantom Menace? Because we both have recently rewatched The Phantom Menace. How did you feel going back and rewatching it? Kind of like, what's your new takes, your new thoughts?
So the biggest one was, I'm very relieved to now finally have watched this movie with zero bias of like just people's very imbalanced criticisms being a part of my thought process, and like even having other people's criticisms a part of my mindset going into it, not even a part of my own belief about the content, influences how I watch it. So I was, first of all, it was that much of a new experience where I was going in like how you say real well, suspension of disbelief, where I think people would say, hey, if you guys can't hear us, please tell us. Anyway, suspension of disbelief, where it's like a new experience, and that's the prerequisite to how I felt differently. So that's the first thing. Overall, we're gonna go scene by scene, right?
Yeah,
and
we'll basically
specify
walk through the movie. Yeah.
So my overall new thing is just removing my past complaints and other people's criticisms that I don't agree with as a part of my experience.
Yeah, I had I'll get to Phantom Menace in a second. I had a very similar experience just the other day watching Rise of Skywalker, and kind of being more active in social media as far as the I'd say just the current narrative and discourse around that movie, and it like seeps into your brain. Like these scenes that a lot of people have, like that I never had a problem with to begin with. Say hey to Darth Man. Go follow Darth Man on TikTok. He does some awesome content. Also talks about Star Wars all the time. But yeah, it's just one of those things. Like the same thing happened with the Phantom Menace. Of like, there are new complaints and new. What's so interesting is like all the old complaints. You still see that we dealt with 15 years ago, but now even on the opposite end of that spectrum is all the stuff that people love about the prequels nowadays. They were not universally loved kind of the way they are today, and just kind of seeing like, oh yeah, like this is a really cool part, like, oh, these connections that we make from Anakin to the original trilogy, and now we have the sequels, and we have Rogue One and Solo, and we're starting to see all these connections, and with all the new connections now, we have Book of Boba Fett, Mandalorian. Darth Man, we are talking about Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. We are going to be going through every single Star Wars movie pretty much every other week, and just kind of like rewatching them and kind of just talking about our thoughts and opinions. We're kind of go do some pretty deep dives. And speaking of deep dives, let's dive into it.
Awesome.
Before we do that, where would you, not like a direct number, but where would you put, before you rewatched it, where would you put the Phantom Menace in the saga, including like Rogue One and Solo? Like top 1, 2, 3, bottom, middle?
I'm gonna go with my gut, mid-tier.
Mid-tier?
Okay. Mid-tier, yeah.
This is, for me,
which high mid-tier. Sorry.
Yeah, for me, high to mid.
Because mid-tier is, that's just middle. Like it's
yeah. For me, this
mid-tier.
is my favorite prequel, and rewatching it makes it still more my favorite prequel.
Yeah, it is now my favorite prequel too, actually.
Yeah, I'm excited to see once we watch Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, and also I'm gonna at some point finish the Clone Wars in my lifetime.
I will at some point read Alphabet Squadron.
Yeah, that book's so good. I won't talk about it because I'll go on forever. But yeah, so let's do the. Ooh, I screwed that up. Let's just go. I'm going to read through the title crawl because it's the start of every Star Wars movie except for Solo and Rogue One. Turmoil has engulfed the Galactic Republic. The taxation of trade routes to outlying star systems is in dispute. Hoping to resolve the matter with a blockade of deadly battleships, the greedy Trade Federation has stopped all shipping to the small planet of Naboo. While the Congress of the Republic endlessly debates this alarming chain of events, the Supreme Chancellor has secretly dispatched 2 Jedi Knights, the guardians of peace and justice in the galaxy, to settle the conflict. How do you feel about that opening crawl?
I think it's very going to the mind of the director, I guess. Mm-hmm. I think it's honestly, I think I would open it with just announcing the basic conflict and what they're going to do about it. And how I feel about it, it puts me in this mindset of just enough curiosity. I don't have criticisms at all about the opening crawl.
Yeah. But I like it because I think what it does is if you were not going to like episode 1 because of the politics inside of it, you knew from the opening crawl what this movie's going to be about.
Yeah. True.
So it's just one of those things. Like, I think that we'll get more into it, but episode 1, I think, is so different from almost all of the Star Wars movies. And I think that's why it's one of my favorites. Same with like The Last Jedi and Rogue One. They feel very different.
Different is so good.
Yeah. All right. So we're basically just going to go through the movie. So we basically open up with the trade negotiations. This is, we're introduced to Qui-Gon Jinn, Jedi Master, and his Padawan, Obi-Wan Kenobi, who last we saw Obi-Wan Kenobi was getting sliced in half by Darth Vader. So this, taking it into the consideration of kind of where we were when these movies were released, they're on the Trade Federation ship and they're trying to figure out this blockade. A lot of people don't like this as an opening scene because they think it's slow. But I think it ramps up really, really quickly with, basically they gas the room. They're clearly, this is now an assassination attempt, and we see the 2 lightsabers ignite and they're going full force. But one thing I noticed about this is we start to see in this movie, and we start to see it throughout the rest of the movie and throughout the prequels, is new Jedi abilities. We see them force run. The CGI hasn't aged well. But yeah, like tell me how watching this movie again, like how did this scene go over for you?
So we're talking about the rewatch experience.
Yeah, or just
right?
how
we can talk all of it. Let's flow with it. So I can't wait to hear your take on your initial experience the first time you saw it in the theaters, because I don't actually remember my initial reaction to this scene the first time.
Yeah.
But I can imagine I just like went into my past of how I could have perceived it, because this time I've already laid down the foundation. I'm not going to repeat myself. I went into this with an, open mind and no prior understanding. I just removed all the things I've ever experienced with this film. And this time it was really cool because the age CGI, first of all, and the Jedi abilities, even their I didn't use the breath things yet, but they held their breath. All the things, the atmosphere, the droidicas, the dinky droids. It was very exciting, and it was very fun. But it was also I had this new perception of going, appreciating more of seeing Jedi in action cooperating on a mission. I actually didn't appreciate that as much as I should have before, and so now I just really appreciate the movie starting off with this rogue, not trying to make a pun here, but this rogue stealth, yet diplomatic mission with Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, and the abilities they have, the atmosphere. It's all very good, in my opinion.
Yeah. I remember the first time, when I saw it in the theaters. Yeah, I think this scene starts out slow, but like it ramps up so unbelievably fast. Like it feels like, every other Star Wars movie we've had, it's been pretty explosive right out from the get-go. I mean, Empire kind of starts out a little slower than the other three of the original trilogy, or the two of the original trilogies. But I think you're right. Just two Jedi on screen at two lightsabers on screen, not clashing with each other. It was like a really cool thing to see. And when we see, we don't really see any droids fighting in the original trilogy, but when we see the battle droids, the guns, and then we see the droidicas just rolling down the hallway, and they're thundering down that hallway and just going crazy.
It's impactful.
Yeah. And then they have these huge shields, and you see Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon just like deflecting the blasters, like boom, 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 and they're not hitting the droidicas, and we're seeing like, oh, Jedi have enemies now. Like it's not just I have a lightsaber, so I'm gonna cut you in half.
Good point. They're not invincible, and I also removed a lot of my desensitization from, Force Unleashed, Star Wars Battlefront, Jedi Fallen Order video games, the new movies, all the stimulus of the new films, new games being making me so desensitized to these special effects.
Right.
I say I removed my prior knowledge, but I also had, by doing that, I had this baby mind, but it's really just like a pure experience, like a pure unadulterated experience. And the droidicas and the Jedi having enemies, everything you described, and just the general opening scene is very impactful. And I wonder how 1999 handled that.
It was crazy. That's the thing is, yes, people didn't like Jar Jar, and we'll get into Jar Jar later. But everything else outside of Jar Jar, everyone loved in that movie. But yeah, Xanatos, thanks for tuning in. So yes, seeing the Force push and the droidicas. The droidicas to me are still some of the coolest droids ever in Star Wars. We have some really cool ones that have come out recently, and we've seen older droids get a little bit more stardom. Like we've got IG-11 and Mandalorian. We see IG-88 and Empire Strikes Back, but we see an IG droid and in action. And now we have stuff like the BD droids that are super cute, but and are very capable. But yeah, the droidicas are one of the top tier droids. But yeah, so we basically move from this trade negotiation gone wrong, and we start to see the growing of this Federation blockade and how it's slowly encroaching on Naboo. So Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon escape to Naboo, which is where we meet Jar Jar Binks, the star of Star Wars, the greatest character ever written. But we meet them. We see the Trade Federation starting to move more so onto the planet of Naboo. We start to see their tanks coming on. They are destroying the wildlife of Naboo. You see all these animals coming through, and they are like tearing down the trees. Yeah. It's very aggressive, very imperialistic, very colonial. Like there's no regard for any life on this planet, and it becomes very obvious who the bad guys are.
Yeah.
And I think this is where, we definitely we see this at the beginning of the movie, like this, there seems to be a lot of political speak going on. They're talking about negotiations, and now we're starting to see essentially an act of war on Naboo. And I think it's interesting that this movie, which feels the most kid-friendly and kid-like the star of this movie is a 9-year-old kid, and he has a companion that is a goofy salamander man. Yet it is the most mature in its themes and due process of politics. And it's this very
even the philosophy.
Yeah.
The basic philosophies that Qui-Gon talks about with Shmi and Anakin.
Mm-hmm.
Right on.
Yeah, there's a lot of adult themes in this, despite we can repeat it a million times. Star Wars is made for kids, first and foremost. That's what George Lucas made Star Wars for, was to give movies and imagination to children. And it worked. But it is so interesting that, again, we have the political atmosphere developing more than ever. We see the political echoes of the original trilogy. It's very clear.
Sure.
You have these platoons of literal stormtroopers, and then you have these rebel cells going after the empire, this imperialistic power. So the themes are there. We understand it. We comprehend it. Good versus evil. Here's the political powers. But now we're starting to see, why are you setting up a blockade? How is this going to affect the trade routes? What's going to happen to the people of Naboo? You're now destroying the homeland. And we start to see even the civil disputes on Naboo, which kind of brings us into the next scene where Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon put on their respirators that they did conveniently have in their Jedi robes.
I mean, as a standard procedure.
I would say I would make an argument that will be defeated later on, that Jedi's always come prepared and are always the most capable. But yes, of course, they were going to a world that is well known for having an amphibious and aquatic species and does have an underwater city. I would make an argument that in my backpack trip to a planet like that, I would bring something like that. I think it's very much plot armor in a way, but I think it works.
Well, we don't actually understand how is there lore explaining how Jedi prepare for their missions? Do they, because they have archives, they could be like, we could be going to Utagunga. Let's bring some respirators.
I would say I would make a strong argument to someone that probably happened while Mace Windu and Yoda were saying, hey, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, you are going to Naboo. And they were like, okay, great. Let's learn about Naboo. Okay, you have this very monarchical royal society living there with Theed, but you also have this underwater aquatic civilization with the Gungans. In the same way, I believe you would probably, if you knew you were going to Tatooine or Jakku, you would probably bring extra water.
Yes.
I think you would bring.
It's the inverse of that. You bring extra air.
You bring more air because you might end up underwater.
Yep.
But when we get to Tatooine, we'll talk about how this theory kind of screws itself over because Qui-Gon screws up bad. But
immensely.
But so Jar Jar leads Qui-Gon after some good persuasion to lead him to the city of Utagunga, where we meet the home world. We meet more of the Gungans, and we see the home world. And to me, personally, this is, I think, one of the coolest wow factors of Star Wars is you have this beautiful, lush green world. And we've seen Endor before, which was a nice forest. But this is more lush, almost swampy, There's tons of like varied wildlife going around, and then we go underwater, and it seems like basically just a lake, and then we see a city underneath the lake, and it's the city of bubbles basically. And this is the first alien world we see, or alien city. It's not just buildings or shacks or bases. It's a whole city that we've never seen anything like.
Right.
And this is one of my favorite parts. But how do you feel about Utagunga and the Gungans as a whole?
So that's okay. Specific question. Utagunga and the Gungans as a whole. I actually really like the Gungans. Mm-hmm. I love Utagunga. I love aquatic environments. Mm-hmm. And to specify their race, I can just pick up overall throughout the film. I actually consistently like them. Mm-hmm. I know in our first episode, I said my least favorite character was Boss Nass. Mm-hmm. I actually dig the guy. I'll wait for that scene when we talk about that scene. But anyway, overall, I like them. I have 2 thumbs up for Utagunga and the Gungans.
I love Utagunga as a city, as a concept of a city. It's one of my favorite places in Star Wars. I don't know if magical is a word that I want to use, but it does feel, it comes from an old podcast, but I fully embrace the moniker of anything that makes Star Wars feel bigger is better. Yes. And Utagunga really encapsulates that, because we don't really see anything quite like Utagunga until The Last Jedi with Crate, of something that is not just generic biome, but we call it something else.
True, actually. That's a very good point.
Like, Coruscant's a city. Geonosis is basically another desert planet. It's just a different shade of brown. We see very...
In the context of the movies.
Right? Yeah. We see... Yeah, because you have, like, Felucia and stuff like that. That is a little bit more alien.
But not much happens.
Yeah.
Until we do Clone Wars.
Yeah.
But, like, only core Star Wars fans watch Clone Wars.
Yeah. And it's definitely... I think Clone Wars has gotten bigger. As like with the advent of like Disney Plus and stuff like that, I think more people are getting into it. So like the Mandalorian,
that's very true.
Mandalorian has definitely boosted that interest. But yeah, like as far as if we just look at the movies, I mean, even Rogue One and Solo, like it's city planets or township planets. Like Jeddah is a cool city, but it's just another, dry, arid climate.
Yeah, and you're actually saying something I thought of when I saw Utagunga last night and today. I was like, okay, this must have been real foreign and interesting for Star Wars at the time.
Yep.
And it's almost frustrating to me. I don't let it become frustrating, but how people don't actually see that choice as something perfect for expanding Star Wars when it comes back after its absence after Return of the Jedi in 1981 or something.
Return of Jedi, I forget the year. Jedi does pre.
But yeah, the return of Star Wars films.
It had been 15-something years.
It's fascinating. Yeah. I think if I were an adult who loved the original trilogy, and I was, my age now, I had very young childhood experience with the original trilogy. Walking in to see Utagunga, and I had an open, curious mind, I'd be like, this is the coolest. Like, oh my God, I'm going into a Star Wars universe aquatic environment with a city in there.
And what I think is so interesting, and I think we kind of see it with the Ewoks and Endor, of like we kind of see they basically live in tree forts, which makes sense for what kind of critters they are. But what's so cool about Utagunga to me is like there are no doors. There's no like real hallways. Everything is 100% catered to that species.
Yeah.
Like it's an aquatic species. They walk through bubbles, basically.
It's so cool.
Yeah, it is. This is how I would imagine, and we do see this in the Clone Wars, but when we see Admiral Akbar,
it's truly otherworldly.
Yeah.
Is what you're saying.
Yeah. When we see Admiral Akbar in Return of the Jedi, he's just operating on a ship that looks very foreign because it is a Mon Cala ship. But it's not until the Clone Wars that we do see how the Mon Cala live. And again, I think the Clone Wars, I don't like the arc of Mon Cala particularly, but I do think the setting of it really works very well and has that very same Utagunga feel.
Yes, it does. And I love your points, because I mean, like I said, it's the, to me, the obvious thing to do when Star Wars returns, at least introduce subtly, which is what they did, Utagunga and otherworldly things. Say this is a different universe. You know, it's very good.
Yeah, it's a different, it's, stuff that I have seen in the Clone Wars, like when we go see Roddi and stuff like that, and we see how these species actually do interact on their homeworld and how different they are from what we're used to with basically just humans, and they have human environments they live on. So yeah, stuff like that I think is really cool. We do learn a little bit more about Jar Jar and how he is a misfit, a mischief, and a troublemaker. Not always entirely his fault. He's just a clumsy person and was basically ostracized from the Gungan society because of his clumsiness, getting him into trouble and getting, I think, probably more specifically that city. That city does seem kind of fragile at the end of the day, and it probably doesn't permit a lot of errors.
That's the thing, I often wonder lately, specifically after my previous watch, which was literally like 3 hours ago, if Jar Jar's jolly behavior and happiness, inherent externalized happiness all the time, actually aids in people's getting triggered by him. Not only his clumsiness and annoyance,
He's very positive. He is there's no negative about Jar Jar other than the fact that he's clumsy. And when he's clumsy, it usually ends up working out for him in the end.
He learns from it seems like. He becomes Padme's.
As the movies go along, he really does become, we see that plucky happiness, especially when he sees Anakin again after a long time. But yeah, I think we learn a little bit more we learn a lot about that character, I think, just from the brief interaction in Utagunga. And we see the Gungans rush away from Jar Jar. And this is a whole city. It's like, imagine if I drove into Atlanta and everyone started freaking out. Like of the millions of people that live in Atlanta, and just like, oh god, Jace is back.
And they imply we're going to the next scene, right?
Yeah, we see another Jedi mind trick from Qui-Gon. He essentially establishes that Jar Jar owes him a life debt, and that he can't be punished, as Boss Nass says. And Qui-Gon does a Jedi mind trick on Boss Nass and gets. Would you say that's hijacking a vehicle, using the Jedi mind trick to get the little speeder boat they have? Is that theft?
This is a great question,
because that's always bothered me.
It has with me too. I think Jedi mind tricks, it's this topic of, if you can do it, should you? And if you can do it, does it mean you're special for having that ability? So, like, what I'm really saying is Qui-Gon Jinn, does he have the authority to influence another person's mind just because he's a Jedi?
Yeah,
and that never felt good to me either.
So what's so interesting about this scene, because in Attack of the Clones we see that we see Obi-Wan use the Jedi mind trick for good. Go home and rethink your life. He wants to save the guy that's got the death sticks.
Context matters.
Yes, but what's so interesting about this scene is within 2 sentences, I think Qui-Gon, he saves Jar Jar Binks' life. Potentially, we don't know what they're going to do to him, but since we don't know, we can, you always want to assume the worst. You never want to just hope for the best. So he uses the Jedi mind trick to save Jar Jar Binks' life, which I think is admirable, and this is a good reason to use the Jedi mind trick. But in this same breath, essentially, he's like, "Oh, also, give me your car."
I know, right? It's like it's.
Brian says, yeah, it's kind of theft.
Yeah, it is kind of theft. It's totally theft, actually, because no matter how he stole it, if he punched Boss Nass in the face and Grand Theft Auto video game style hurt people, that's theft. If he stoically altered his neurological processes and reverted his mindset to just give him stuff, same.
Because the line is also we could use a speeder. It's like, you swam here. you could swim back. And it's like, and I would
actually, that's the funniest part.
Maybe the respirators have a limited air supply. It's the future, I assume.
I think George Lucas needed a reason for them to have some excitement in the beginning.
Yes, because it transitions into the next scene. But it is like, I'm like, this dude stole that boat. Right. It's just, I just imagine like the Knights of the Old Republic, like that first sentence is like light side points earned, and then the next one, dark side points earned.
Yeah. You should make that meme. Oh my god. No, that's straight up the situation though. And this probably has to do with if Qui-Gon did this already right off the bat. This is why, of course, his ideological differences and disagreeing with the council. I'm sure a lot of those are good, but always bigger fish. Maybe George Lucas's 5-head Twitch terminology, I think that means genius. Maybe George Lucas is actually implying, I think, doesn't Qui-Gon say there's always bigger fish himself?
Yes.
Or does Obi-Wan say it? Either way, one of the Jedi says it. And Qui-Gon was being the bigger fish. What did the fish do? It literally tried to kill the other fish. Yeah. It's like this. We could go into moral conundrums and talk about this. And we are actually already. It's super fun. But I mean, it's like, whatever. It's a display of, in my opinion, it's a display of wait, is this why someone said the movie of Grey Jedi?
No. They were messing with me.
I'm thinking about it too much.
No.
Too deeply.
No.
Because Qui-Gon is technically a Grey Jedi, right?
I know.
He's being immoral.
I don't believe.
He's being immoral right now.
He is by the non-canon edgelord definition of Grey Jedi. This interaction with Boss Nass makes him a Grey Jedi. He's not a Grey Jedi. He's a fantastic Jedi.
Right. If we hyper focus in this one situation, that's what it is. Otherwise,
but yeah. So, man, I never thought we could hyper focus on how Qui-Gon committed Grand Theft Boat and how it makes him a bad Jedi.
We just did it. Achievement. This is this is a video game. We just we got an achievement.
Achievement unlocked. Qui-Gon is the true villain.
Yes.
But yeah, so
from a certain point of view, he is. People don't like Anakin. He is.
Yeah. So yeah, I think this moves on perfectly into the next scene. That I always think it's an interesting thing you say is there's a bigger fish. You have Boss Nass, and then he is in a way preying on Jar Jar for his mischievous ways. And Qui-Gon does save him, but we go with the boat that was stolen, that we've determined is fully stolen by Qui-Gon Jinn, and they are attacked by a huge. There are a total of 3 fish that attack them in this whole sequence. We see the big Gooba fish, as Chaco pointed out. But this scene always, I know a lot of people don't like this scene, and I think maybe because they feel like it drags on with the 3 fish, but I think what's so cool is we see this within this one little ecosystem, we see diverse types of life, including Jar Jar. This is probably what the Gungans had to deal with on a regular basis, is giant fish trying to eat them.
Yeah, true.
And it's something that, we usually, with Tatooine, we saw, banthas, and that's basically it. We see dewbacks as well. On Hoth, you see tauntauns and the wampa, and on Endor, we basically see the Ewoks. But I think what's so cool about Naboo is we've seen all of the animals fleeing through the forest on land. We've met Jar Jar, who's a Gungan. We've met all the other Gungans, and this seems like a very diverse race of people, with the Gungans with the whiskers, the Gungans that are shorter, and then we have Boss Nass. And then now we see 3 whole different types of fish. And I think what is so cool about this whole sequence is we are not even like 20 minutes into this movie, and we've seen so many very diverse things. And I think what this movie does really well is just the world building and the establishment that this is not just humans, Rhodians, Twi'leks, and Mon Calamari anymore.
I love it.
So yeah,
it's a nice commentary which is entirely implied. You just through experiencing the movie itself, it's a commentary via the film of, you know, just simply the diversity of the world. And I mean, that's obvious. That's what you just said, but it's a very nice transition into the prequels.
Yeah. So kind of just harking back is that Gungans this is, I do believe, the most technologically advanced city we have seen. Just the fact, again, there's no doors, no human-like things. You just walk through it, and you know you're basically dry once you get through there.
It's very good. It's a very good look at what other type of technologies could be in the Star Wars universe. Dare I say our own, but I mean, it's in our mind. So yeah, it's very cool to see that. You said no doors. You know, like their doors. They had to think of a way to dry beings when they come inside.
And it's also
through walking through bubble membrane
for a species that I think is meant to be presented as very reclusive and secluded and underwater.
Primitive. Yeah.
The whole city is transparent, and I think that's very interesting that we're meant to believe that these primitive beings who have built a much more advanced society than Theed and the other people of Naboo. I think it's the other way around. Is we're presented this one way when it's actually something else. Like, this is the more advanced society. This is the more transparent society. They are not hiding behind these walls and elaborate things. So I think that was really cool.
Yep.
But Darth Man says he's always under the impression that the mind trick did not work, given how Boss Ness said he will give you enter ship name. What was that thing called? What was the boat called? There's a name for the boat.
Are you talking about Darth Man 8? Are you pretty much saying how Boss Nass gave? I don't remember what it's called either. I hope you remember.
I don't remember the name of the boat, and I just rewatched the movie not long ago.
Yeah, would you say Darth Man is saying
he just gave it to him?
Since he had such an articulate response.
Yes, that's minute.
Like Boss Nass was actually in his right mind. Are you saying that, like, typically when Jedi mind tricks work, they just blindly repeat like what the other person said?
I think the way we understand Jedi mind tricks is that it's a domination of the mind, and I would maybe make the argument that once he had dominated Boss Nass's mind, that anything that was needed from there on out, from an undisclosed basically amount of time, would be essentially obliged.
Right. So Jedi mind tricks don't have to be Obi-Wan style and Mos Eisley statement to repeat.
Yeah, or we see it with Rey. You know,
deeper.
Remove these restraints.
True.
Yeah.
So I can see. I don't understand, but I do understand. I can understand why you would think that. At least how it is always shown.
At the same time, yeah, I would agree with that. You know, it is one of those things of, it's not necessarily clear, but even in A New Hope, you know, Obi-Wan does this little move, and we hear something, but maybe he knocked something over with the Force, or maybe he just kind of tricked the minds of the stormtroopers to think something else was going on elsewhere. But yeah, we'll kind of switch over a little bit further into the movie to basically the political hostages. Basically, when the Separatists or the Trade Federation have taken over Theed, and they are essentially escorting Queen Amidala and her royal guards to most likely just go back to the Trade Federation ship. And Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and Jar Jar Binks interfere, and they take out the droids. And I think this is what we're starting to. This is really more just setup of how bad the Trade Federation is, and obviously it gets more nuanced as we go along. But again, we start off with them trying to assassinate 2 Jedi. We go to them destroying the natural habitats of an independent and peaceful world, and now they are rounding up and taking hostage political affiliations. So yeah, I think this is, again, not that far into the movie, and we have a pretty good lineup and / replacement for the Empire. Of like they're doing
100%.
Yeah, they're doing some pretty terrible things right off the bat. There's no build up to how bad they are. They're just being bad right out of the gate.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting, how George Lucas kind of set up the Trade Federation, because what's so interesting is that the expanded universe of Star Wars, whether that's Legends or the canon books, there's nuance to both sides, and we learned that. But George Lucas, I think, is very, very deliberate. The Empire is bad, and the Trade Federation is bad. And you can dive deep into how bad, and not everyone is bad, and everyone has their own problems. But
I think this is why Star Wars often becomes very honestly not very popular, but it sometimes becomes very morality driven. More so do the right and wrong thing type, not really diving into morality, but there is a blatant good guy, bad guy dynamic. And it's made clear within the first, what is this at? What are we at right here?
We're at
20 minutes?
No, probably like 25, 30 minutes.
25, 30 minutes, okay.
We've met, Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon. We've met Queen Amidala. We've met Jar Jar, and yeah, we're all already getting ready to take off. Being Japanese.
Are you? Right? I don't need to spend too much time here. I would like clarity though, Darth Choco. Are you saying that Amidala's headdress, the aesthetics of Naboo, that type of stuff looks Oriental? I'm not being ignorant. I'm using the whole entire continent of Asia right there in the Oriental landscape. Yes, we could specify Japanese. I think it looks Chinese sometimes to me too, though.
That is, I think what he's talking about is the Nemoidians.
Oh, yeah.
Which is kind of fucked up how the accents, that is something that a lot of people have had issues with, was the accents of the Phantom Menace.
I saw criticism that was very bothersome to me.
Yeah.
And only because I don't think it makes much sense whatsoever. They were saying the Nemoidians should sound like demons and monsters and should scare you. And I'm like, everything you just described is scary enough, like concerning enough to be like, these guys need to stop it. Like the Neimoidians need to stop it. So I didn't really need this. Like, I don't need to go there. But Neimoidians don't need to be these scary things.
Right.
And they do sound Chinese. Are you talking more about how it's problematic?
Yeah.
In terms of real life implications of what could be implied or not implied?
The Japanese are the bad people.
I have a question then. Do you think George Lucas made a naive mistake?
Yeah, I would make the argument that I don't think George Lucas intentionally tried to make it so that the Japanese style alien dialect was bad and evil. I just think he was trying to make them seem different and separate from all the other people. And I think in the process, screwed up.
Yeah. I was about to say it's just a big mistake. Because people are going to interpret it as, what's a human? The closest thing they sound like to humans. Even if you're not prejudiced, you're going to say that sounds like Chinese or Japanese.
I would make the argument.
What can you do?
I would say would be, and maybe someone has done it. If you want to distinguish dialects while still using quote English,
Monster Hunter language. Well, sorry.
Yeah,
keep going.
Even that has like tinges of Japanese in it, and I think that's done really well. Feels like an unconscious bias. I've never met George Lucas.
I haven't either.
I would.
We can't know his intent. That's the problem.
I think, especially how old George Lucas is, I think that's totally possible.
Actually, if we think about it that way, if he's raised an American, sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
But
I can't know.
What I think is interesting about it is if I want to be on George Lucas's side, I would say make up an accent right now that we've never heard before. I think it's a next to impossible feat,
True.
And maybe it was just one of those things of we were just looking for some type of accent, and that's where it fell. I don't think it makes it
well.
right.
The way we have to really do actual objectivity and true scientific methods to find a result, find out who those voice actors are.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think. Right. I think a lot of, and this is kind of the same thing with Jar Jar. I think a lot of the grievances of the Phantom Menace would have been solved by having these alien races speak their alien languages, and just have subtitles.
Oh, so you're actually eliminating a concept I didn't think of. Or do you think they were going the easy route, where observers can just hear a language that's on the planet that we live on, and not have to read subtitles and hear something immense, totally foreign? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So exactly, it was definitely an attempt of othering Neimoidians. I think that is 100% accurate. I think that's what he wanted to do. I don't think it was necessarily done with malevolence. I don't have any. Maybe George Lucas,
that's good,
hates Japanese people, and I just don't know. I'm not confirming or denying George Lucas's racial stereotype.
This is like 2 steps beyond just the basic. Do you let people's creators' personal differences than you get in the way of the artwork? It's like actually trying to figure out if it's a racist or biased thing. And it's like there's really, if we knew, it'd be one thing, but
I think there's I think
otherworld.
I think the 2 comments with Chaco and Brian are accurate. Is I think there's probably an unconscious bias there from George Lucas. Exactly what Brian said.
Hey,
othering
Darth
them.
Choco, I could say a lot of unconscious mind to you, man. And like, there's a lot in our unconscious mind. So if George Lucas was raised in American, inundated with American concern for communism, who knows? Like, that's so true. And then also otherness. I mean, it could be both.
Yeah. It's always been an interesting topic, with both Jar Jar and then both the Gungans and the Neimoidians. Of definitely, I would err on not the best choice, but I understand the concepts going on, and I don't think there's a lot of malevolence going on, but yes, alien languages with subtitles would have been better, I think, overall.
Do you think it would have freaked out some? I'm trying to get the word normie out of my vocabulary. Like normal movie watchers who don't watch space and weird stuff.
Because Greedo is like a beloved character. Who shot first? Greedo doesn't speak.
True, he speaks Rhodian.
Yeah. So I think that was George Lucas trying to play it safe and it biting him in the butt.
Nobody's a capitalist. Yeah.
Yes.
They're capitalists. Do it, but what they share in common with communism, and like obviously the communism we've seen expressed when it gets extreme, is control. So same thing on both ends.
Yeah, it is. They definitely air the extremism of, I think, both economic powers. But let's move on through the movie. We're gonna talk. We basically have the heroes that we have so far are fleeing Naboo. They get into the N1 starfighters that are not souped up and not cool, like Din Djarin's Naboo starfighter. Spoiler alert. Sorry. They hop on one of the transport ships, the Naboo transport ships, the super cool chrome transport ship, and they flee through the blockade that the Trade Federation has set up, and they need to stop because their ship is in disrepair, and so they need to stop on a remote planet that we have somehow seen before. We end up on Tatooine, the home of Luke Skywalker.
How cool is that, actually? They go polar opposites in a healthy way, and it could be, from certain points of view, unhealthy. Like Gungan, Gunga, so different. And then
water world to desert world. I think it is interesting that we see this huge contrast, and I think kind of where we go here is we are introduced to the main character. We meet Anakin Skywalker here. He is a young boy, and what I think is so interesting about this is kind of discussed in the movie and kind of not. There is a very specific reason that they end up on Tatooine. The Force is bringing them to Tatooine. They didn't go to Tatooine just because it was on the way. The Force brought them there for a specific reason. And I think this is where I think it starts. This movie, to me, I think really opens up on Tatooine. I think we get lots of awesome world building and establishing our characters on Naboo. But once we get to Tatooine, we really start to dive into the Force. We start to learn a lot from Qui-Gon. And I think it's really interesting how we kind of are introduced into Anakin. He's a boy who is living a life of slavery with his mother. He's owned by Watto, who they're trying to buy parts from. But what's so interesting about Anakin is that, and I've noticed this since, I think I was old enough to grasp the concept, is he is essentially a slave by only work and title. He does not feel like he is a slave, and he knows he's meant for so much more. We meet the greatest Mary Sue of all time on Tatooine. Yes, Anakin Skywalker is the greatest Mary Sue of all time. He is nothing in comparison to his mother, Shmi. But no, I think it's interesting because we start to see this theme of Star Wars of found family. We see it in the prequels, and we see it in the originals, and it is the main theme of the sequels is found family. We started to see that Anakin is starting to take a liking to Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, and Padme. Yeah. How do you feel about Anakin as a whole, like kind of in this movie? More so like when we first meet him as a 9-year-old boy. Darth Vader as a 9-year-old boy.
Well, I can see how some people would have felt very off-put by yippee.
Yes.
But I also can see how the truth of him being an abject slave starts building this foundation of, oh, this has a lot of potential for angst, lack mentality and anger. Like, let's go. So it's both. I'm not trying to be so neutral, honestly. I agree. I really do agree with both of those criticisms. Like the yippies, when I was a critic, man, I hated the yippies and skippies of Anakin, little dude. But now I'm like more tolerant. I'm like, hey, how about this? What if Darth Vader actually sounded like that? Let's just do it. He did, guys. He did. It's in Phantom Menace. And so the slave is saying yippee skippy and has no free will choice in terms of his fate. He's stuck at a part shop. So I think it's if you can handle like all things going on, or at least the fact that he's a slave, it's the environment, the scenes, all variables in my opinion. It's just a very good way to introduce Anakin.
I think it's a really interesting way. I'm probably in the same neutral camp of like, I really like diving deep into the youth of Anakin Skywalker. But if Hayden Christensen would have played Anakin Skywalker through all 3 movies, I think that would have served really, really well.
100%.
If he would have just been a young teenager living with his mother as a slave.
Yeah, the age didn't need to be so young, honestly.
It didn't. I wouldn't say that it was the most detrimental thing. I think it works. At the end of the day, like it's still my favorite prequel movie, so it can't be that bad. We'll move on to the next kind of big scene in a second. I think really solidifies Anakin for me.
Yeah, it works without being necessity.
Yeah,
like it didn't have to be Hayden, but it definitely would have felt more holistic.
It's one of those things that I genuinely think it would have been better overall if it would have been Hayden the whole time. But I don't think that it being Jake Lloyd at such a young age was so detrimental.
Exactly. It's not movie crushing.
Yeah.
doesn't destroy the movie.
Yeah, so we're introduced obviously to his mother, Shmi, the strongest Skywalker of all time. But we start to dive into him and his relationship with Watto, and this kind of, well, we can touch on this is kind of going back to the respirators of being prepared. My biggest problem with this movie, still to this day, is Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn does not know that Targaryens cannot be manipulated by the Force. Like, that has always bugged me, that he's such a learned Jedi Master, and he tries to do the Jedi. That's something I feel like they would teach you, of like, here are the species that you cannot do this on, and he tries it anyways.
I'm starting to think that he was more of a hopeful romantic in terms of universal and galactic events, and he was more focused on Chosen One and like the living Force and those things, and forgot Watto was Toydarian. I almost a Trandoshan. He's not a Trandoshan. Toydarian, who is on the list of immune to mind manipulation.
Yeah.
So it does. It bothers me too, because Qui-Gon should have it together.
Yes, should have and doesn't. And we could make this about the shortcomings of the film, or maybe it's really just the shortcomings of Qui-Gon.
Right. And you talked about that with one of the books, like removing your personal desires from the progression of a character's path and accepting it for what it is.
Yes.
And I didn't do that in the past. I was like, why doesn't he understand? This bothers me. And I'm like, I still think it bothers me. If I was standing next to him, like, dude, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing, man? But I know that until I watched him mess up. No.
Yeah. Jonathan says he might just not have any experience with his species.
Yeah.
I think that, to me, has always been the problem of that. It's one of those things of, I don't know, that maybe the best way I could put it is it's kind of like going to being a tour guide for like another culture and not being super well versed in the culture. I do think that the Jedi do teach you more than just how to swing a lightsaber and push things with the Force. And to me, I've always personally felt that is something that the Jedi would go over with you, at least by the time you are a Jedi Master.
But the non and applicable mind trick people, races,
understanding the various species of the galaxy, because you will not just be interacting with your own species. Like Qui-Gon Jinn is clearly a human. You would expect, especially as a Jedi Master, like you would be taught to be understanding of other species,
right,
including Toydarians. It's not like
there's no way it's not in a Jedi holocron for Padawans,
right? And it's one of those things, like we see that Toydarian, like Watto's not the only Toydarian, and we see that later on.
They actually use them a lot throughout.
Like in the Clone Wars, like they're a big part. And so it's one of those things, like, yes, in the film, it's just that is just a way that is just plot armor. At the end of the day, of like, why doesn't he just mind trick him into giving him Anakin? Well, the Toydarians aren't that. And it's like, that is something that maybe if it would have changed, you could have had Obi-Wan try and do that, and Qui-Gon's like,
that would have been awesome.
Silly Padawan.
Would have been awesome.
Like, let him do it. Let him do it.
Yeah. But then that would, I guess that would have to change Qui-Gon's capabilities, and we don't really know everything about Qui-Gon.
Yes. But moving on from that, like small grievance that I've always had, kind of more focusing on Anakin, is we see that he has built C-3PO. C-3PO does not have his shell on. And we do have like a really wholesome moment of R2-D2 and C-3PO meeting for the first time in Anakin's home, which I think is a nice.
Were people in the audience laughing?
No, I think a lot of people really enjoyed that.
Well, I guess I meant enjoyment laughter.
Yeah.
Like C-3PO and R2, yeah, you could see it.
There are 10,000 systems in the Republic. Yes, and I guess more to your point, Tatooine's not part of the Republic at this point. I don't think it is at this point.
It has to do with how all-knowing the Jedi are, and what if they, like, we could do that. We could say, what if not Trandoshans, Toydarians? What if Toydarians were not, for some reason, listed in the studies, in the textbooks?
Yeah. And I think there's like other stuff that, not to dwell on the topic too much, that's something that even if that were the case, you know, maybe while he's on the comm with Obi-Wan is like, we need to talk. Oh, I've met a species named Trandoshan. We can't use the Force.
I influenced you negatively, Toydarian.
Yeah, we can. Oh yeah, God. We can't use that. Like, it's something that it feels like it was just so glossed over, and it's just this little tiny thing that's always bugged me. There's a lot of little things that I think could have made that interaction a little bit better, but I don't want to dwell on the negative stuff. We do see Anakin, and he has this. We see that he's got this mechanical aptitude. He's built C-3PO. He's working on a droid. He works for Watto in basically the droid shop, or in this basically a scrapyard. And we slowly start to see this pod racer he's built come together, and lots of things kind of play out here. We start to understand kind of who this young Anakin Skywalker is. We see the caring nature of Qui-Gon Jinn, and how he really does want the best for everyone he comes into contact with. And I think that's what makes him such a good Jedi, is even though he's not on this epic quest to free all the slaves, right?
It's awesome. He's balanced.
Yeah. He knows he can't do that. And instead of him coming and being like, oh yes, I'm a Jedi Knight, I'm totally here to free all the slaves of Tatooine. Like, it's not his goal. That's not his quest, basically. But he's never, he makes it very clear that, if he could, he would. He just can't right now. But in the end, he still kind of does make that work with the pod race, which I kind of wanted to do the pod race, mostly because
I love the point you brought up.
Yeah.
Balancing the empathetic desire to save everything, and then just, hey, I can't.
Yeah, you don't want, especially for people who are in a vulnerable state like that, you don't want to get their hopes up. You don't want to make them believe something that won't happen, because in a way, we do learn later on that Shmi does make her way out of this situation. And it's one of those things, if not just Shmi, but if other people in general, if you had some Jedi masters coming through every couple of years to say they were going to end slavery on Tatooine and nothing happens, how's that going to change the perception of the Jedi? How's that going to change their perception on their situation? And
it makes them dependent, and really not even dependent because nothing happened, right? It makes them negate their own responsibility.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I would say that gives more power to people like Watto, that realize like, oh, they're always going to be looking at something that's never going to happen, and that gives them more control.
Oh yeah, I was talking about the slaves themselves, like not really thinking how they can maybe get out of slavery, and just waiting for the Jedi to do it for them. But so it gives them more disempowerment. It gives Watto more power. Yeah, more power.
It's one of the things they will be expecting something else to happen, and it lets people like Watto, who are in the slave trade business, they get all the power, because they'll always think the Jedi are coming to save them. I know the Jedi aren't coming to save them, so they'll always be looking forward to that, and it's never going to happen. So I think Qui-Gon's very smart and very wise for approaching that situation the way he does. But
it's the wrong
format. No, that's right. I'm just
better
had it.
Better font.
Yeah.
Don't save my battery.
Yeah. Cool. So let's move on. We kind of learned a little bit more about Qui-Gon and Anakin. Let's move on to probably the longest sequences, but I think still one of the coolest things that's ever happened in Star Wars, and that's the pod race. And there's two things that I know a lot of people probably know this, but I think this is one of the moments where I think the CGI of this film really shines even today. Like, that pod race still looks so good. All those pod racers look awesome. The environments look awesome. the fact that every pod race has its own unique sound, its own unique design, and own unique species that pilots it is so cool. We don't see two Dougs. We don't see two humans. Like everyone is individual. It's basically the Olympics in a way.
That's a cool point I never noticed.
And yeah, just like the visual and sound design, they distinctly made it so that every single pod race has its own unique sound and own unique style. And I always thought that was really cool. And I think, kind of, again, a little bit of Boba Fett spoilers is as they're going through this course, we do see the Tuskens start to shoot at Anakin and the other pod racers. And the way I've always looked at it and kind of like Boba Fett solidified it was you have these unbelievably loud, super fast pod racers zipping through the desert, going through Beggar's Canyon. That is, for what all we know, that is Tusken territory. And that's one of those things, like imagine just like your neighborhood, people just started crashing planes next to your house. Yeah. What would you do? You would think war has broken out.
Right.
Like this is not just guys driving their motorcycles around your neighborhood. They're literally crashing these things and they are exploding all around them. That is super threatening. And that's something that I think definitely gets overlooked.
Nope.
Sorry, we just had a little bit of a technical difficulty.
I don't know what went to sleep. HDMI or...
Uh-oh.
Try clicking the mouse again.
We lost our display there. We
power's on, displays TV is on, right?
Yeah.
How's the input for that side?
Yeah, it's all on.
It's on,
so
right?
strange. You know what we could do?
Pop up my monitor. Scoot that back a little bit. TV. Or just take it off. And that input should be on this side. We cannot see chat. We need to see chat. The stream should still be going if it is high. Power cable. Oh, sorry. An extension cord, does that go far enough?
Oh, I think I know what happened.
What happened?
Yeah, okay. It's fine.
Something fall out?
I think, yeah, something just came unplugged randomly. All right.
It's like a start cam button.
Yeah, I got it. Oh no.
Why does it do that?
I don't know. We will give us 1 second. We're trying to solve through some. We're trying to figure out some technical difficulties.
What is that? That was the camera, huh?
And we're back. All right. Okay. So we were at the pod race. Sorry about those technical difficulties.
Sorry, guys.
We had a slight issue.
All right.
Okay. So we're good. Continuing on, the pod race is a super pivotal moment for Anakin. And we see that, they kind of say that, humans can't really win the pod race. They don't have the reflexes, but obviously Anakin's so strong in the Force that he can do it.
Significant.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, and I think it's something that I wish they would touch on more. I would like to see more humans fail at pod racing. Like, I would like to see like a Fast and the Furious style TV show of maybe it's like our first Star Wars show where it's not a human main character.
Oh, that's a really cool plot.
And because Anakin won the Boonta Eve Classic,
it's a big deal.
You have all these humans that go into pod racing and die.
They want to one up Anakin.
They're like, oh no, humans can totally do it. And now I think would solidify how special Anakin was. That a 9-year-old boy, human boy, could win the Boonta Eve Classic. Against someone like Sebulba who tried to sabotage him. But once he wins, he wins his freedom. Qui-Gon Jinn helps him win that freedom. And this is one of the pivotal moments, because I think one of the most important characters in this movie, even though we don't see her for that long, and I know I joke about it, but I think Shmi is so important.
This is something that I recently rediscovered for myself.
I like Shmi a lot. I think she became, when rewatching this, and seriously taking a look at it, Shmi became my favorite character of this film. Because throughout the movie, she, I just think about myself, like if I brought an old man, a teenage girl, and a lizard into my house, my parents would have killed me. Especially if the guy was holding a sword, like a real sword.
And the lizard was licking all your fruit with his 15-inch tongue. And
she was so patient and so understanding with Anakin.
Well, it brings up the question: is she are her abilities not really outwardly, force sensitive, but like her understanding and mind is just solid. We don't know a lot about her, do we?
No,
I don't know
really,
much.
I don't know much, if there is much on her in the EU. I don't think there's really anything in canon. But just from the movie alone, I think the scenes that we get with Shmi, because even when she learns that he's won his freedom and Qui-Gon does it, she understands immediately that she's not going with him, and she wants him because she knows that there's so much more for him out there than on Tatooine and with her. And I think what she has more than Obi-Wan does, definitely more than her son does, and more than every Jedi does, is she understands the true meaning of not having attachments.
Yeah.
Of course she loves Anakin.
Non-attachment and altruism in a specific one-on-one relationship.
She loves Anakin with all. Anakin is everything to her, but she knows how important it is. And she's going under this that Qui-Gon is going to teach him, not Obi-Wan. She doesn't know Obi-Wan. And we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
But she understands Qui-Gon, and I think she has a connection of some sort with Qui-Gon. Whether that's the Force or just genuine human connection.
Related.
And she understands that the future of Anakin is not on Tatooine, and it would be unbelievably selfish and harmful for her to keep him with her. And I think that's so interesting about her character, of how she is a better representation of the Jedi than the Jedi are.
I agree.
because we constantly look at the, people like, oh well, the Jedi are too dogmatic, the Jedi this, the Jedi that. We're looking at individuals that have failed in one way or the other, or maybe not even just failed, just maybe aren't doing their best as what the Jedi should be. And we have a woman who is currently being enslaved on a desert planet and is not wielding a lightsaber, does not have any training, but she understands that more than most of the Jedi do. And I think that's what makes her so interesting and so important, so impactful. Like, I've always liked Shmi as a character, but rewatching it this time, I was like, she's so great.
You can even tell all we have to work with are her basic interactions anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not basic. Like, that's the thing. It brings up this understanding that this type of ability is not about hitting laser swords with your enemies, manipulating the mind of another for your selfish gain as a Sith or your altruistic gain as a Jedi, still manipulating someone to do it. But, it's not these flashy things. You're in a kitchen hanging out with people. How are you acting?
Mm-hmm.
And Shmi is like representing that by just being the mother of this boy and interacting with new people.
She has an
obviously in a situation specific.
Yeah, but prior to the pod race, she has an interaction with Qui-Gon about they're talking about Anakin and how gifted and how special he is. Kind of when they revealed that there was no father. She says that very matter of fact. She at this point realizes what is most likely going to occur, especially if she obviously hates him doing the pod races because she does care about him so much, and she's like, it's not, it's one of those things. It's not, I'm not worried about you. I'm worried about, like Sebulba that will actively try and stop you. And that it won't be your fault if you crash and burn. It'll be someone else's fault. She obviously doesn't want to see that for her son. But when Qui-Gon kind of explains to her that he has the potential at least to become a Jedi, and that means going to Coruscant and training with him, she kind of understands that, and she understands that this is a good thing for him.
That is the situation to talk about for this topic, because she also doesn't say, Qui-Gon, can you try a little harder to get me out too? Anything resembling that type of sentiment, that type of asking, like, please try harder to save me. She's like, that's what it is, and my son is the best.
Yep, she puts her son before herself, which is so hard to do. It's with any type of relationship, it is always difficult to put someone else before yourself.
Right.
And I think she does it so well. I think when Anakin is leaving Tatooine, when he is walking away with Qui-Gon and Padme, she's watching basically him joyfully kind of saying goodbye to C-3PO and all of this stuff, and you can tell her heart's breaking, but she's remaining stoic, and she understands what's going on, and she understands why it's happening.
Yeah,
and she's not upset about it.
Well, she clearly had this time to contemplate why I had a spontaneous, inexplicable pregnancy, and my son can do all this crazy stuff. She's like, I would love to see a slice of life Shmi, one season cool
I agree.
show of her, like laboring this child, trudging through whatever hardship she has gone through. I don't know. Like, they'd have to write it, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So my point right now is she clearly displays, there's this one moment, I think it's the nighttime scene, or no, it's when she's talking to Qui-Gon, the initial moment where she's like, there is no father.
That's the nighttime.
Like, I think she alludes to the fact that she's deeply understood this is an anomaly.
Yeah, when Anakin cuts himself and he tests for the midichlorians, and Shmi walks in, and then they have that conversation basically on the upper level of that house.
Yes.
And it's one of those things, like, that conversation I think is so impactful when you start to see the parallels of like the religious descendants, the mother birthing the child with no father, and this child is so gifted and he has a connection to something that people can't explain. It's obviously very clear what they're alluding to, but I think what is so interesting about Shmi is that it is never about her, even though it could be. It could always be about her, and she could, like you said, she could try and fight for her own freedom, and she doesn't, because I think she understands like it's not her time, and her time will come, and it does. We know that it does, and it's one of the things. I think it's because she is so strong that she is able to get out. But yeah,
they're alluding to the Immaculate Conception thing in religion, and who knows, that Plagueis theory, his experiments went rampant in Gardula's slave pens, and it's like weird stuff, like, or something more specific happened, or literally the Force birthed Anakin. Who knows? But yeah, Shmi as a character, she's awesome, and she is everything you said she is, and I really appreciate how she handled the situation she did.
Yeah, she definitely very much became my favorite character. My favorite character used to be Qui-Gon, and I still love Qui-Gon, but rewatching this, Shmi very easily became my favorite character this whole movie, even though she's only in like the first half. Moving on, we do get that last moment and that last talk with Shmi and Anakin when he's leaving with Qui-Gon, and she basically says to him, like, this is, you don't need to worry about me. You never need to look back. You only need to look ahead. Which is the downfall of Anakin Skywalker, is he does look back. He does not keep his eyes on the future, which is how we get Darth Vader.
Right.
But yeah, so we leave the settlement that they're kind of living in Mos Eisley. They're making their way back to the ship. We are introduced to the first combat scene with Qui-Gon and Maul. We don't know much about Maul yet. We've only seen him once. Basically just show his face. And we see this really intricate lightsaber fight. And this is the first time we see the intricate lightsaber fights that the prequels are known for, is this very stylish, very bombastic lightsaber fight. And we do get a great shot, once Qui-Gon jumps onto the ship as they're taking off, and we see, the really oddly long lightsaber handle with only one blade out, just retract while he's watching over it. And, I think that's a really cool shot. But more specifically, after that, we move on to Coruscant. And I think Coruscant is really cool because it is from the expanded universe. It is not a product of George Lucas. And it becomes a pivotal point.
I didn't know that. I saw it in the notes for the outline. I did not know that's why you wrote it.
Yep.
Interesting.
And before we get to one little nod is, I always thought it was, we had that moment with C-3PO and R2-D2 when Qui-Gon jumps onto the ship and he's like out of breath from fighting a Sith Lord, obviously, and they're all kind of like huddled around, and Qui-Gon says, "Obi-Wan Kenobi, meet Anakin Skywalker." And this is the first time they're obviously together on the screen, but it is this very simple interaction that is going to change everything. In
do you know what's wild? Obi-Wan, Episode 1. We have. Why do I sense we picked up another unintelligent life form? No,
meaningless life
form. And then Episode 2. I could say it next time. I'll repeat myself. Why do I get the feeling that you're going to be the end of me or something?
Yes.
And we have in the nice finale. I'll save that for Episode 3.
Obi-Wan has some really, really good lines.
He saw it coming since the moment
just like
Anakin
all leads up to A New Hope. But yeah, I think that's a great moment. I think Coruscant itself was so well represented and so well done. And just the fact that it was, something that, I think a lot of the dialogue going on right now is that the EU is never canon, and by technicality it wasn't, but, a lot of people still have a lot of, capital built up into the expanded universe, and then having stuff like this brought in to the main movies is a big deal, and I think often gets overlooked. But when we get to Coruscant, obviously Anakin has to meet the Jedi Council. And one of the things before Obi-Wan and before Qui-Gon meets with the Council to kind of brief them on what happened, he says a very interesting line. He says, "Your focus determines your reality," to Anakin, which is such an impactful line. Something like you can just put into your whole life. Is yeah. I mean, how do you feel about that line?
Well, I'll tell you how my experience went the last 24 hours. I read the outline like last week, and then last night when I read the outline, I saw that you noted that, and I'm like, oh yeah, of course. Like I love thinking about that. And then I forgot that was Qui-Gon's line to Anakin.
Mm-hmm.
And it gave me this deeper appreciation of this story in this universe. But obviously, the meaning of Anakin's fall is actually way more. It should be way more obvious.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not gonna worry about should, first of all. But to me, it's obvious when you re-listen. Qui-Gon's saying,
yeah,
your focus determines your reality, and to me, you said, what do you think about that? First of all, I'll go with the movie. I'll only say in the movie, really, but Qui-Gon, if he was Anakin's teacher, that moment told me, man, maybe if Qui-Gon taught Anakin, that's what it is, a student teacher, Padawan master. Mm-hmm. Like, how would that have happened? Because Qui-Gon, yeah, he's pretty chill, he's pretty neutral, but like in terms of disciplining his student, his Padawan, I don't know. He's probably on it more so than Obi-Wan. And let's be real, Obi-Wan was a Padawan practically, right out of being a Padawan and being a teacher and a newborn Jedi Knight on the council. So it's like a big burden. And so of course we can get into predestination and how, the Force willed that Qui-Gon died, and Obi-Wan failed at teaching Anakin, so Obi-Wan could learn his lessons, and that Anakin could die and become Vader and then be redeemed by his son, and so his son could learn the lessons. Like, of course we could do that.
Yeah.
But also, I think that if Qui-Gon taught Anakin, it would have been a different apprenticeship for Anakin.
100%.
And it might have been because, okay, that scene, your focus determines your reality. I was about to go on a tangent about that other topic. But I'm going to focus on your focus determines your reality.
Yep.
And that statement is that's life.
It really
is life.
And we can put it into Anakin is that his focus was his reality, because his focus was split between the Jedi Council and becoming a part of the Jedi Council. Not just being a good Jedi, but becoming a part of the Jedi Council. Not every Jedi has to become part of the Council. And his other focus was Padme. And I don't believe that it was wrong for him to focus on Padme, but it was clearly he could not handle both, or basically all three: being a Jedi, being in love with Padme, and the desire to become a council member. And because he was so focused on that, his reality became so distorted because it was split. And that's how we fall down this hole that we get into in Revenge of the Sith. But yeah, I mean, in life, where your focus is, and it doesn't mean like, oh, you're focused on your job or your school. It's literally where is your focus in life, and that will determine where you go from there.
Right, and it's so multi-layered because you said his focus was split, and it gets into so much. Like, I bet if Qui-Gon sat down and talked to Anakin, it would be fascinating to hear. Mm-hmm. And to me, that line does mean so much because it brings up priority, it brings up awareness, it brings up, discipline, it brings up all these things, it brings up emotion, reasoning, it brings up everything. Like, that's why I said it's life. That's why I stopped myself and just said it's life. Yeah,
this is something we'll get into when we get to the original trilogy. Is the one thing, since like really diving deep into the prequels and especially the Phantom Menace, is the one thing I've always wanted to see was like a flash moment of Luke pulling off Vader's helmet And the moment before Anakin passes right into the Force is like a world between worlds conversation and reflection with Qui-Gon of like, let's look at where we are now. Let's look at how we, and not like in a demeaning or reprimanding way, but an understanding and reflective way. And that's something I've always wanted to see is like the last moment of Anakin's physical life would have been met with a conversation with Qui-Gon.
Dang.
Yeah. I've always wanted to see that of just like, and I think, I don't know if it'll happen. It's just something that I've always wanted to see. But in the Kenobi series, it's something that I would like to see.
Well, I'm going to use the phrase, they better do that because in Revenge of the Sith, the last thing we hear Yoda and Obi-Wan say to each other is, "Your old friend has returned from the netherworlds." Mm-hmm. And it's like, dude, I want to see it on screen.
And the thing that I like about Qui-Gon, and especially with when he has these lines or these messages to Anakin, is if we get something like that, it wouldn't be, like a teacher or a boss. It would be, I would just want to talk about what all happened. And I want you to think about it. And it's not like you did obviously he did the wrong thing. He went the wrong way and he did horrible things. But I think Qui-Gon is such a great Jedi that would not be the issue. It would be, I want to talk to you about everything. Mm-hmm. And it would never be accusatory. It would never be about blame.
It would remove his guilt ultimately, Anakin's guilt ultimately.
And it would be like, let's just, it would, not so much like what did you do wrong and why did you do it? Just more of how do you feel now? Now that the weight has been lifted, how do you feel? And I think the one person that could get, like, I don't think Yoda could give him that. I don't think Obi-Wan could give him that. I think only Qui-Gon could give him that. Because Qui-Gon was the closest thing he had to a father, even though it was very brief. And I think Anakin always held a higher respect for Qui-Gon than he did Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan was like the cool boss, right? It's like, oh yeah, your boss retired or your cool teacher, but like it was never like the real inspiration. They were, he said it like they were more like brothers and friends than it was this like mentor or father. I think it's very obvious he respected Obi-Wan and appreciated his teachings, but I think you're right. If it would have been Qui-Gon, you would have had a whole different story.
Which would be less, it wouldn't be what we know.
So. Yeah. So kind of moving on from that, we see Qui-Gon talk to the Jedi. And we kind of see that the Jedi aren't all on the same page here. And I think this is the first moment of the fall of the Jedi. We've got Mr. Appleby patios. Basically, the prequel should have been 3 full movies of Liam Neeson and Anakin playing catch up and having father son movies. You're not wrong. I would eat that up. I think what would have been really interesting in the prequels is having Liam Neeson come back every movie as like the angel on Anakin's shoulder, and not like the Bugs Bunny way of doing it, but like
like for real, like real talk,
like
serious.
When Anakin goes to the Tusken camp in episode 2, again, Qui-Gon would never reprimand him for that. It would just, we need to talk about it.
I want to commission an animator to make
that.
Hey, Apple. Yeah. So where are you going?
Yeah.
With the next section.
So kind of like we see like the Jedi are kind of, this is our first introduction to like the Jedi Order, outside of just the stories of the Jedi Order. But we also see that it's not doing so well. It is kind of falling apart and kind of fractured in a way. But then we move away from the Jedi Council into the Senate. And I think this is where the politics become very, very interesting, because we see Senator Palpatine at the time going up against Chancellor Valorum. And there is this political rivalry here. And we obviously know the ulterior motives of Palpatine, but we see this vicious attack from Palpatine and Padme against Valorum. It feels like a Star Wars fight, but it's political. And I think that's a really interesting thing.
Bring up the vote of no confidence?
Yes. Because it's one of those things that, you know, Valorum is floored by it because he knows this is not going to end well for him. He's already, you know, it's brought up in earlier, you know, he's not doing well.
Yeah.
And I think how this film is shot, we basically see these platforms moving around, and it does feel almost like a choreographed like battle. It's
right.
It's not just like I stood up, I spoke my word, I sat back down, and then the other person. No, there is movement and motion.
Yeah.
In all of this,
I felt exactly what you're saying right now when I watched it.
It's a fight. It's a fight scene with words, but there is movement in there, and I think it's a really clever scene.
It's cool to see that in the final rotunda moment. We see is
when he's throwing the Senate chairs at Yoda.
Yeah.
That scene's great. Then the other line that I think is really great comes from Padme, and it's she said, "It's clear to me the Republic no longer functions," which is this is the fall of the Republic. This is the first movie is the real rise of the Galactic Empire. It is not fully hatched, but the egg has presented itself. And Padme sees this, and I think other people do. We get into this a little bit in Attack of the Clones. We definitely get into the Clone Wars, and definitely in Revenge of the Sith, with essentially the rebellion being born.
It's a very, 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 excuse the three varies, but I mean, it's a great commentary on the importance of healthy influence. Because what we have happening, you know, if you watched it, you understand Palpatine's about to usurp the Republic and just dominate. Yeah. And what happened with Valorum, you know, the situations that were happening are just ripe for a benevolently intentional leader who, you know, leadership doesn't work. Like, there needs to be cooperation on all ends, all parties. Yes. And so it's just inevitable that someone like Palpatine is going to step onto the scene. In my opinion, it's inevitable in those situations. There has to be a lot of security, and it's a good commentary on what's happening, but also in terms of the movie, it just, I was going to say it screams that meaning, but it paints that picture so well.
I think you're right, because Palpatine obviously wants to have full control himself, whereas we see the two total opposites of Palpatine and Padme. They are polar opposites to each other's characters, and Padme is all about getting everyone to cooperate, like you said. There are an infinite amount of needs that need to be met by like how Darth Man said. There's 10,000 systems plus. We will not. How is Padme going to decide exactly what everyone needs? That's impossible. And we see this even in the Clone Wars when she's talking about when she believes that there is a way to work with the separatist systems, and she has allies there, and she knows that they're not everyone and within the separatist alliance is, you know, these ruthless Count Dooku types. Like, that's just not the reality. And she wants to work with everyone. Whereas Palpatine obviously is orchestrating everything, but even just under the guise of the Supreme Chancellor of the Republic, he clearly wants to do everything himself. Everything is his call. And obviously we know where that leads. And it eventually leads to his fall.
This is very interesting, because I was under the thought process. It's very basic, I think, of just saying, you know, Valorum and Palpatine are polar opposites. But really, I think that Palpatine and Padme are polar opposites in terms of like their willpower and drive for how passionate they are for what they want to do. Because Valorum just seems like not even in his mindset like capable of doing anything.
I think that Palpatine
that's so blank. He could do some things. But
I think Palpatine and Valorum are that good reflection of, like, you know, a lot of people feel that elections or the passing of powers, whether that be like in the United States, we always had the presidential election. It could be a prime minister or anything like that. A lot of people feel it is the lesser of two evils being is your choices. And we have, again, if we erase the Sith Lord aspect of Palpatine, we do have this, Valorum versus Palpatine is, I think for a lot of people, is the lesser of two evils. And they feel like this senator from Naboo, very wealthy, very affluent, probably does not actually care that much about the Gungans, probably doesn't care about the Mon Cala or the Rhodians, but at least he's, to a lot of people, isn't as bad as Valorum has been, whereas Padme comes in with that totally opposite of like, why do we have to settle for this bull crap? Why can't we just focus on making everything as good as we can and doing it together? And yeah, I mean, that's why she's my favorite character of the Clone Wars.
No, she's great. She has that icy passion that is awesome. Mm-hmm. And but the thing is, what's fascinating to me is like Palpatine. That's why I was appreciating so deeply you saying they're opposites, because he has that icy passion, but he has no warmth with what she has. Mm-hmm. He's pure. Just, I want to dominate. Yeah, yeah,
I mean that goes to and it's not canon, but I don't really care. It comes to Plagueis training,
right? And
on Mygeeto.
And I will say, like what you said, I want to comment on that. We can move on. If you unless you have something to say in response, no. But Palpatine does. I'm sure he is objectively appealing, innocently too, for most of the Republic. This is why, like in the book. Lost Stars. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Lost Stars. There are people who are like Tarkin fans, Palpatine fans. Mm-hmm. And it's like, that was cool insight for me when I read that. And I'm tying it into episode 1.
Yeah.
People must have felt relieved to have Palpatine
to
talk, have influence, negotiate, and then eventually, as we see in the 2 movies following.
Yeah.
And it's like you can't blame it, but that is what happens sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we'll touch on this. I think it also, again, it does reflect that reality, because I mean, no matter where you fall on your country's side of politics, you will see the same commentary towards the opposition, no matter who it is, on what side you are. It's always this like round table of like, this person is no good, they're ruining everything, they're doing nothing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we flip the sides, and the opposite is being said from the opposite side. And I do feel like that is a good reflection of that cycle of, and it's like, we know how bad Palpatine is. As an outside audience, the fourth wall, we know how bad Palpatine is.
Yeah, we really know.
Yeah. Way worse than we've ever dealt with. But it's one of those things like, we have these people who obviously, Padme does the vote of no confidence, and why that's so bad for Valorum is because he knows this is going to work, and he's no longer going to be the Supreme Chancellor of the Republic, because he's not doing so well politically. And so, it is such an interesting, just the two of them, the reflection of, and then you got to keep in mind, this was made not with, I don't even want to mention modern day politics. This was Al Gore and George Bush and Bill Clinton fighting. This was that time. This is not modern day what we're used to. This was way back then, and we could make those same connections to George Bush and Dick Cheney, Al Gore, and Bill Clinton.
For this prequel trilogy to be about staged conflict, micromanaged conflict, says a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's both very interesting and also in a way very sad.
Yes,
we have not progressed past the prequels and its commentary on the politics of George Bush and Bill Clinton and Al Gore fighting it out, and here we are today in 2022. The same spot we've been in.
I mean, like, this is the thing though. All you can do is observe the truth within the prequel Star Wars trilogy and how it still applies when we move past it, and not get sad about it and just smile and make, for yourself, make some substance of enjoyment in your life about it. It's like we could beat ourselves up about it.
If we make it really positive, we could just say Star Wars is timeless. Because I guarantee you we're gonna find ourselves 30 years from now and being like, oh yeah, candidate A and candidate B of whatever country this may be in 30 years. Be like, oh yeah, it's terrible. Like, you remember Valorum and Palpatine? Same shit.
Oh my god. Is this why they actually decanonized Plagueis?
No,
it's a joke.
So. I
don't think so either. I actually don't think so.
But okay, moving on. The movie is.
Thank you for the laughter.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming down here.
The movie is. Yeah. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be in my parents' basement talking about Al Gore on a Star Wars podcast.
Perfect.
So we're essentially approaching the final act of the film. Padme has decided that she cannot do anything for the Republic within Coruscant, and she is going to stand up for herself, do what she wants to do, be her own person, because she's a badass in every single way. And she's going back to Naboo, despite everyone saying no, including Palpatine. And she listens to nobody. She only listens to herself, which I think makes her such a great character. And so she flies back to Naboo, and we essentially begin the Battle of Naboo at this point. And this kind of starts off with, I think, which is really interesting, is we see our first peace treaty kind of happening in this war setup. We see the Gungans and the people of Theed deciding that they do actually want to work together. It is the only way they both realize the full threat that the Separatists pose. Not even just to the Republic, to Naboo itself. And I think this is interesting because this is the first time we see humans and a specific alien species coming to terms. And I think it really does kind of, again, it sets up this original trilogy because the Empire is so subtly anti any alien outside of humans, or at least if you don't look close enough to a human. And we see Padme setting this up of like, this is not us versus them. This is all of us together to stop them. So I think that's a really interesting little piece.
You helped me deeply understand why I collected the burgundy robe and silver blaster Padme card when she's like gazing into the camera.
Yes.
Like that why I collected that card in Top Star Wars Card Trader on iPhone App Store. Nice. And I had like 10,000 in that card and a bunch of other characters too. I collected specific characters, and you said Padme listens to herself. And what's really cool about this whole Skywalker saga, it starts off with Padme listening to herself and Rey listening to herself. Yeah. Anyway, to make it applicable to this podcast, no, like she has this ability to unite the Gungans and the Naboo, and I don't think they even have negotiations, like territory
totally separate.
It is totally an indigenous indigenous next to, what's you can't really define civilized in terms of how societies structured.
The colonizers and the colonized,
exactly.
Kind of.
Yes.
And I might be wrong on that aspect of who was there first. You would assume the Gungans.
It seems
based on the biome that Naboo.
But the humans could have been the land dwellers. Yeah.
We don't. I would have to look into it.
I don't know.
But there's clearly hostility there that is ended by Padme. And I think what's so interesting about this scene in particular, and then kind of storming Theed, is we see that not only is she going to be this political power, she is going to pick up a blaster and take action for herself.
Yeah.
And we see this in her daughter. We see this in Leia. And to me, I always felt like, this scene of in Revenge of the Sith when Padme's, the very famous line. So this is how liberty dies, not with, or this is how democracy dies, not with uproarious applause, basically. Like this is, I always like, this is the start of the rebellion. To me, the start of the rebellion is Padme storming her own palace. That is the start.
That's
of the
true.
Rebellion.
That's actually true. Like my point of view, but that's my understanding of what's happening. That is right.
Because it's been taken over, and she's taking it back, and she's not taking it back because she believes it's hers. She's taking it back because she has to drive these people out, because her planet and the people who inhabit it are at risk. It's not about her fancy house.
That's she became disenfranchised overnight because of the Trade Federation.
Yeah, because we could easily make a character that is like, you took my castle, I'm taking my castle back. So many medieval fantasy, stories are that story exactly. This is not about her castle. She could care less about the castle. This is about the people of Naboo and the Gungans.
Yeah, her will is something else. Her will, and her own guidance. Not listening to Palpatine, even though he's claiming to side with her. Not listening to Valorum. Even though he's a nice guy trying to hold things together.
Yeah.
Not even really listening to Obi-Wan or Qui-Gon. Just what do we need to do? What do we need to do? And just her own process. And I'm sure being as aware as she can of everything happening. So I love that you say she's the start of the rebellion, because that is sick. Like that if anything, that brings Phantom Menace such a deeper level of like importance beyond just introducing Anakin.
Yeah. And then kind of moving on from there, we do start this this 3-way final scene, which is essentially the Duel of the Fates scene. And that is Padme storming the castle of Theed. We have Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon fighting against the Sith Lord. And then we have the battle above in the starships going against the Trade Federation ship, the droid control ship, and then even a fourth one is the Gungans versus the droid army. So you kind of have these 4 battles going on all at once. But I kind of really want to talk about. We talked about it a little bit the last time we were on. Qui-Gon versus Maul is so impactful, and I think is such a good representation of the light and the dark, because we see how these people, we see how Obi-Wan fights, we see how Qui-Gon fights, and we see how Maul fights, and we see how vastly different each of them are. Maul,
combat, talking about combat in the Force is very different than talking about your mentality in the Force, in my opinion.
Yeah, because props to the people who choreographed it. And I know when these movies came out, there was a lot of complaints about how they were choreographed.
I was blown away by the choreography when I watched it today.
Yeah.
I was like, why have I dismissed this scene?
It's something that I think a lot of people don't like it, but I think The Last Jedi did really well is telling a story through motion.
Yes.
I think the Throne Room does tell a very good story.
That's
through motion.
So good.
And I think the fight that we have with Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and Maul, there is not a single word spoken between the 3 of them. From beginning, the only word that is spoken is no. Right. When Obi-Wan watches Qui-Gon die or get stabbed, basically. But that story is told. You understand who Obi-Wan is. You understand who Qui-Gon is, and you understand who Maul is. You understand their motives, where they are, and where their minds are. So props to the people who choreographed that whole scene. That is such an amazing thing. But then we also have these other moments where we have the Gungans fighting the droid army. And I think for me, there's not a lot of nuance to this scene. I think it is just to imply the scale of this invasion, the oppressive invasion of the Separatists, and kind of maybe harkens back to the Ewoks versus the Empire.
Right.
Of
natural order versus the order of machines and coercion.
And I think it kind of, as Chaco said, is they're very, very technical. They have these balls that can be launched that will literally disable all electronic equipment. the people in Theed don't have that technology. The Jedi don't have that technology. No, we don't ever see this again in the Republic.
It's like reverse cortosis, isn't
it? So I can't remember what those balls are, but yeah, it's something that has been explained. I'd have to look it up. But yeah, I think that's very interesting. And then we do see Anakin kind of getting into the cockpit before Maul has his moment with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. Something that I brought up, and we do see this kind of happen again in the Book of Boba Fett. That Naboo starfighter is very much shaped like a pod racer, and so
we didn't even get into that yet.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Like why we're not split screen right now.
Yeah.
And your TikTok.
Yeah.
And my favorite ship you asked me about last time.
Yeah. And we'll get to all of that.
Yes.
But I think this scene is really cool. I think how we see this with Anakin in the N1 starfighter, because we saw him flying the pod racer, the two in the front, the cockpit in the back, the dual control setup. It is a pod racer that he's flying, and we see this in A New Hope. We see Luke flying or playing with the T-16 Skyhopper. There's his actual T-16 Skyhopper behind him in its hangar, and then he flies the X-wing. He mentions, "Oh yeah, I used to, do Beggar's Canyon just like his father did." And then in The Force Awakens,
continuity.
And then in The Force Awakens, we see Rey taking apart a Star Destroyer on Jakku, and then at the exact same moment that all of these things happen, at the end of the movie, we see her climbing Starkiller Base and being able to open the panels of Starkiller Base and know which ones to get into, which power couplings to pull. So no, hers is not the pilot side of it, but it is the intuition and her character as the scavenger, because all she's Rey the scavenger, because it's like Snoke refers to her as just the scavenger girl.
Yeah.
And so we see that they have this little echo basically of what they can do, and they're going to translate that later to stop the current evil or the current antagonist. And I think all three movies or all three introductions to the trilogies nail that.
It's subtle too. It's not in your face, so it doesn't become a cheesy thing.
Yeah, it's not like we don't hear Anakin say like, "Oh, it's a pod racer."
Yeah.
We don't say like Luke doesn't say, "Ho ho ho! I'm so glad Incom uses the same joystick as the T-16 Skyhopper in the X-wing." It's like no, he mentions like, "Oh yeah, I used to shoot womp rats going through Beggar's Canyon in my T-16." Okay, yeah, we get that. And then same with Rey. She's not like, she doesn't tell Han Solo like, "Oh yeah, I took apart Star Destroyers, so now I'm going to go do this." Like, no, we are shown, we are not told what's going on. I think that's really good.
It speaks to the humility too, and like the most we get is Luke just merely mentioning just to let someone know.
Yeah,
and he'll be okay at it at least.
Yeah, and one of the things that I actually did rewatching this, it's something that we kind of touched on a little bit, but this is something that's always, as I've gotten older, started to bother me about something like Return of the Jedi and the Phantom Menace. There is this multi-scene dissonance where we have the Duel of the Fates going on with Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon and Maul. We have the Battle of Naboo. We have Padme storming the palace and the Gungans kind of fighting, and then we have Anakin saying things like, "I'll try spinning. That's a good trick," and even a little bit with Jar Jar, like the goofiness of like, oh, he's pulling apart he accidentally pulls down the door and all the little balls put. And it reminds me a lot of Return of the Jedi with the Ewoks, as you have this fantastic battle. You have Wedge and Lando storming the Death Star, going to the reactor. You have the whole Rebel fleet going toe to toe with like at the time an incomprehensible number of Star Destroyers, as well as a new Death Star. You have Luke, Vader, and Palpatine squaring off, not just with lightsabers, but like a battle of the minds, and it's all super good. And then every once in a while you get pulled back to Endor, and it's teddy bears tripping ATSTs with logs. And it's this dissonance that I think George Lucas sometimes does of like, you have this fantastic scene set up and you're trying to add a little bit of goofiness that for me personally has always pulled me out just a little bit too much. Not to the point where I hate it, but I'm just like, if we didn't have try spinning, that's a good trick, or the goofiness of Jar Jar Binks kind of going on, I'd be like, this is the perfect scene. Like, it would.
Yeah, what you're telling me is pretty much if the Duel of Fates fight was not fragmented and it was one continuous stream of events, it would be more impactful and a little more cohesive.
I think
stuff like that.
I think the order that they do in both Return of the Jedi and The Phantom Menace is fine. Right. I think it is trying to lighten the mood on the most serious part of the film. Is what?
Oh, you think it's trying to lighten the mood?
I think with Anakin saying the things he's saying.
Oh, so interesting.
And with Jar Jar doing the things he's doing, and then in the same way with the Ewoks doing their goofy antics.
Yeah.
While taking out the stormtroopers. Yeah. I think I understand the point of the Ewoks, and I get it, and I appreciate that point. But I think the fact that it is so layered inside of these super serious, super critical moments,
right,
detracts from those critical.
This is what I think right here. It's actually an agreement with what you're saying because it's still there. Mm-hmm. Even if, let's say that they did. They finished off the fight on Naboo, mm-hmm. and then they shot the Starfighter fights where Anakin blows up the Trade Federation Starfighter, mm-hmm. and then they do Duel of Fates. I think most average movie watchers would be able to consciously say that'll happen in the relatively same amount of time, and by the time the events are resolved, it doesn't really. It's like this is where I don't need to care too much about criticism, but. Whether they do that and remove the lighthearted aspect, this, because what I thought the intention was to make it known that everything happened at the same time.
Yeah.
But also, here's a cool trick, and then Jar Jar, the new general, conversing with the well-versed general about combat and like, you're incompetent, but I'm saving you. It's like. It is lighthearted in nature inherently.
It's one of those things like I don't know if it's necessarily that. It's one of those things like maybe they could have taken those lighthearted moments and maybe put them after the critical. Because when we're going from try spinning, that's a good trick, or now this is pod racing, and then literally cutting to like Obi-Wan and Maul going toe to toe and like literally trying to slice each other to pieces. I think that's where it's always like kind of like if you I don't mind the lightheartedness, but just that should have maybe been moved towards the end. Like maybe if if Anakin, we have a shot of Anakin, after the droid control ship has been destroyed and the droids have fallen and Padme no longer has the opposition with the Trade Federation. And then he says something like, now this is pod racing, as he blasts towards Naboo. I could get behind something like that. I always felt like just those two movies in particular, it was just this very strange dissonance.
Well, that's the thing. Like, you and I don't let it ruin the movie.
So it doesn't ruin the movie.
So think about the people who let it ruin the movie, Like, that's the type of stuff, as a director, I think about. Like, how many people will actually let this ruin Star Wars Episode 1 for them?
A lot of people still do. I think less people do as the new generation has come in.
Way less, I'd say. I agree.
And I guess once all this kind of collectively happens, we've lost Qui-Gon. Obi-Wan, I think at this point has shown his anger and how he's not ready to train Anakin because he lets his emotions get the best of him, and it does mean he beats Maul because of it. I don't want to say that he necessarily goes to the dark side, but he pulls away from the teachings of the Jedi to beat Maul, which, hey, it worked. It's one of the things you can't argue with the results, but I think it is one of those things. This does show he's not ready to train Anakin.
That's the point. That is. I love that you said it in that way, because if he was meditating and had calm composure, and he only displayed that behavior when the second he engaged with Maul, saber to saber, that would be more representative of maybe a Qui-Gon type mentality who just maybe steps into like very, very, very aggressive fight style, and then they can come back. But what the scene we talked about this last time, how they got cut off in the barriers.
Yeah,
Obi-Wan was literally
ready to go.
I can't contain myself. And then Qui-Gon is shroom. And I actually thought about exactly what you're talking about today. I said to myself, did Qui-Gon fail fighting Maul because he's more passive in combat than Maul? I don't know how to analyze combat or martial arts at all, so I can't even give an answer or draw a conclusion. But like, is that a part of it, or did he just simply make a mistake? Because even Obi-Wan fighting with such passion could have made a mistake.
I think the in-universe explanation to all of this, without getting super introspective about his abilities or his passiveness, is the Sith have been gone for over 1,000 years. Jedi aren't really going toe-to-toe in lightsaber combat.
They're out of practice?
It's something, yeah, I would say it's out of practice. And also the Sith that the Jedi were taught of, and you can't, this is not necessarily canon, but the Sith of what the Jedi understand are very different from the rule of two Sith, the Bane Sith. And that's what Maul is. And Maul is even an abomination to that as well. He's this secret hiding Sith that wasn't supposed to happen.
Yeah, he up until Plagueis was out of the picture, he was just, don't worry about it. That's just my assassin. Don't worry about it. It's just my assassin. And it's like, I got more plans for him.
Yeah.
And he's like a steeping mess of dark side energy.
We see a lot, and again, I haven't finished all of it. We see a lot in Clone Wars and Rebels. We do dive deeper into Maul's character, and we see how he kind of does manage some of the things he does. You know, Maul is a character. His character trait is he is a failure through and through.
Yes, and he couldn't cope with it.
Yeah. So
that creates a good dark side.
Yeah. He's an interesting character. I think, you know, the reality situation is Qui-Gon cannot live. Yeah, you know, it sets up Darth Vader. Like, Qui-Gon dying is the reason we get Darth Vader. You know, Maul, you know, it's not necessarily his fault. You know, it's just that's just the event that happened that led us to where we get to.
What do they delineate the living force from the cosmic force?
Yeah, and Qui-Gon very much lives in the living force. That's even said in the, you know, he tells Obi-Wan he has much to learn about the living force.
They get into that in Clone Wars. It's a little incentive. It's pretty cool.
Yeah,
I couldn't remember what the delineations were, but the aspect of him needing to die for Anakin and Vader and Luke and Leia to happen, that is Qui-Gon's purpose in death. So. I think it's the cosmic force. I don't remember. The universal force, something.
But this is essentially the end of the film. We go pretty much from here. You know, we go back to the council once more. You know, Anakin was denied to become a Jedi, and basically Obi-Wan says that he will train Anakin. It is accepted. And then we do cut to the funeral of Qui-Gon Jinn, and we see all of the characters of this first movie kind of honoring Qui-Gon Jinn, and it's one of the things I think that everyone who's there, and I would even say even Palpatine, understands how important Qui-Gon was and how devastating of a loss it was. And obviously for Palpatine, this is a victory, but he is there, and we see this foreshadowing of his, you know, when Mace Windu and Yoda are talking, you know, when they say, "Oh, to the Ra, who did we kill? The Master, the Apprentice." Cut to Palpatine. You know, great filmmaking right there, all in all. But I think Palpatine being at that funeral, I don't think that is a celebration. I genuinely think that Palpatine was paying respect to Qui-Gon Jinn. I think he, as much as he hated the Jedi, and he probably hated Qui-Gon Jinn, he understood how important that Qui-Gon Jinn was. And if Qui-Gon Jinn hadn't found Anakin, Palpatine wouldn't have Anakin.
Right. That's the point I was following you on, and Palpatine understood that sort of, you know, I think even though how malevolent and really animalistic he is, he understood that type of, paradox in the Force. Like, I'm going to respect this individual for going up against the council. I didn't have to go up against the council as a politician and say, look at this boy. Oh, he did it for me. It's that weird thing.
Yeah.
The weird thing.
So, yeah. And, we kind of have this, we have the celebration there, but it is very short-lived because very shortly after, just a few years later, we do get the Clone Wars. We think that this essentially was a trade dispute, and this was a battle that almost broke out into a full-blown war. And then we don't have much time after that we're at peace. So it's one of those interesting things of this is almost the foreshadowing of what's to come with the Clone Wars and everything else going on. Yeah, I mean, that is the finale of the movie. It's just the peace celebration on Naboo and Theed with the Gungans. There's the offering of that big mystic crystal ball to Boss Nass. And he says, peace. And that's the movie.
Yeah.
I love this movie. It's definitely one of my favorite Star Wars movies. It is by far my favorite prequel movie. I'm excited to see rewatch the other ones. But let's do a quick breakdown. Who's your favorite character of this movie?
Padme. Changed. Things change.
Yeah.
That's what happens.
Same with
right now. Padme.
Same with me. My favorite was always Qui-Gon. It is Shmi. Shmi is my favorite in this movie.
Awesome. Solid choice.
Yeah. What's your favorite vehicle in this movie?
I guess the same. I think now I know they're called N1 Starfighters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, mine hasn't changed. It's still the N1 Starfighter, especially after Book of Boba Fett. That thing is so cool. The hot rod Starfighter,
and they made it look like my favorite episode 2 craft, which might change when we talk about episode 2. Yeah. But for now, the Naboo Royal.
Yeah,
Nubian.
Nubian is something. Is the
silver, the chrome. Yeah. I love the silver.
All the chrome ships.
Silver
are so cool.
Yeah, it's so good.
What's your favorite planet?
Naboo.
I would agree. I think it's really cool seeing Coruscant for the first time, but Naboo definitely.
Well, I know, honestly, it's so hard for me. I love the Coruscant scenes more in episode 1. So I like episode 1 Coruscant more than episode 2 and 3, but we get Otogunga in episode 1, so I have to choose Naboo.
Yeah, I like Naboo just because it just feels so different. It's on its surface level, it seems very normal, but underneath the surface, it's so different. And yeah, it's my favorite. What's your favorite scene of the movie?
When Padme dupes the Captain Nimoy in is it whatever in her palace?
Yep.
And it's that swap where he's like, she's the imposter, and they run after.
Yeah.
And it's that little swap, and it's like
she pulls the blasters out of her chair.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That tinge of like, it's like so simple. It's in so many movies. It's in so many situations. But I just love that. And I could go deeper with your focus creates your reality. Qui-Gon kneeling down, talking a little Darth Vader, like, yo, stay on top of your stuff. But there's some just spark and joy with that duping of the Lot Dod Senate.
Yeah.
Why am I saying Lot Dod? I don't know. Maybe it's Lot Dod. Forgetting the main guy's name. What was your
favorite scene? Lizard Brain tells me pod race. I still love the pod race, but I think my favorite scene.
They're great.
Yeah, the pod race is so good. It's so cool. I think my favorite scene, not that I enjoy, but I get the most out of, is Anakin leaving Tatooine and Shmi like kneeling down with Anakin and talking.
Yeah,
like that. Rewatching that, I was like, this is great.
Mm-hmm.
This is, it's sad, but it's great.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So now for the fun negatives. Least favorite character.
Least favorite character. Okay. Oh, the Naboo. This might sound toxic, but the Naboo pilot, he just bothers me a little bit.
Yeah.
The red orange jacket Naboo pilot.
Oh, the main security officer.
Not knock what does Panaka bother me more? I don't know. The Naboo security is just a little. The main ones who follow them to Tatooine from Naboo in the initial part. It's like I don't even dislike them, but like they're my least favorite by far because like just some of their lines and behavior feel a little like whatever, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect me, but they're my least favorite for sure.
I would go kind of like what Chaco is saying, and you know I don't think I have the same reasons as Chaco, but the Neimoidians, to me, outside of the I'll just say for brevity the insensitivity factor of the Neimoidians, I felt the way they communicated, it made it to me a little when I was rewatching this, it made it less believable that they were capable of holding. They were so goofy and like surprised by everything and scared by everything, that I was like, these guys are really in a position of power. So I think that they rewatching that, and I was like, I definitely see the insensitivity factor of it for sure, and how it could have been done better. Like I think all of those alien species would have been served better by just speaking their own native language.
I actually agree with you because most people don't have the prior knowledge that Sidious and Plagueis put Neimoidians into the specific Trade Federation blockade power ability.
Yeah.
And so also they're goofy, but like their physical appearance can, for me, that it's not frightening, but it can be otherworldly enough to where it's like, of course that'd be the villain. I think it'd be more impactful if it was a group of a specified planet human race that was doing that blockade to humans. That would be really interesting. But like the downside there is it's too worldly.
Yes, I agree.
So I see good and bad. I see good and bad on both sides. From my understanding, but what you're saying about them being goofy, they could have shifted their behavior a little bit, and it would have been a little more. These dudes are managing a lot of influence. Like they don't seem influential.
If they held like that feeling of power, like if they were, it's a little more dominant in their gestures and mannerisms. I think that would have gone a long way. But yeah, least favorite vehicle. I mean, I think mine is pretty much the same last time. Maul Speeder. I still don't like Maul Speeder. I think it's so goofy.
Yeah, just as I made you say Trandoshan instead of Toydarian.
Yeah.
You made me we didn't make each other anything, but like when I thought about your criticisms of it, it was so funny when I was watching it today. I was expecting him to be way back, and then like, boom, like I don't want to unplug anything again, but like, boom, like Hot Rod or whatever it's called. Sorry, Harley Davidson.
Yeah.
But I'm Darth Maul, bro. But it was more so just like
he definitely looks like he's in a lazy boy.
He was like this.
Yeah, he's like this with his legs out. And that dude's on a recliner.
He's on a recliner.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like I was exaggerating. But my least favorite is simply Anakin's pod because it had to have so much work done on it.
Okay.
Call that too pragmatic and practical, but
coming from someone who played a lot of Star Wars Episode 1 Racer on Nintendo 64, Anakin's pod racer is the most boring pod racer.
Really?
I think so. I think all the other pod racers are so
I like Bulba's pod.
Bulba's pod is awesome.
The big orange like things that end up making an X.
And it's like Ben Quadraneros' pod, even though it doesn't take off, just the 4 engines with the cross.
So glad he's a Quadranero.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other
his pod racer
Anakin's is probably the most lame. Yeah. But I will say Quadranero, I saw a vehicle on my way here called like a Quadro or something, some sort of SUV, and that's really cool. I thought it was a cool little thing because I was like Quadranero, isn't that similar to the pod racer I'm gonna go talk about today?
There's a pod racer in the game that is I have checked, and someone might be able to correct me if I'm wrong. There's a pod racer named Niba Key. It's in the game, and he has a pod racer where the cockpit is in the front. And he has 2 huge engines that are not coupled. They're just attached to his cockpit.
Oh.
Yeah, it is cool looking. I'll show you.
Is it in the film?
I don't think it's in the film. I think it's just in the game. But he has the coolest pod racer.
That's awesome.
What's your... I mean, we don't have a huge plethora of planets in this movie. So, what's your least favorite planet?
I'm gonna take into account more of the events that happen now on this, but we have 3, right?
Yeah. We have Coruscant, Naboo, and
I don't know. Tatooine.
Yeah, I was thinking Tatooine, but I like the guidance to Tatooine from Naboo. That I kind of really like, and
situations are great.
I like being on Tatooine with the pod race, so I would say
being too literal.
Yeah,
I'm being too literal.
It's just a desert planet.
Right. So I like Coruscant least.
Yeah, if I'm going by which planet would I rather be on, I don't want to be on Tatooine. But if I'm going by which planet I enjoyed my time with in the movie, Coruscant would be my least.
There you go. I agree, actually. I love the diplomacy and the politics and the conflict, but because it's interesting. But yeah, it's the least.
Yeah. What's your least favorite scene? I have a hyper specific one. We've already gone.
I have a hyper specific one, and it has to do with my least favorite character. Just like the weird acting with the initial problems on the Nubian starcraft of leaving Naboo. Mm-hmm. Just the reactions are just like, I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I don't know how to explain myself.
Whatever. If you don't like it, you don't like it.
It's my least favorite.
I think will always, no one will ever change my mind. Qui-Gon screwing up the Toydarian interaction will always be like, you idiot. You should know better than this.
No, that's a well thought out least favorite scene.
But yeah, that's mostly it for like the favorites and least favorites we've gone through the movie. I want to just end the movie sentiment with what is the lesson you took away? And we'll do this with every movie. Like, what's the lesson you learned? Rewatching it and just kind of going off of that.
Honestly, it's what you focus on creates your reality. To me, my deeper understanding would be, my personal way to say that would be same understanding. Listen, like Qui-Gon understands that deeper than I do. I bet you anything actually, but the way I would say it is your focus creates your path and experience in reality. Yeah. And it's like just hyper specific. So to me, what did I do today? Myself, my focus. I had to manage my focus and say, all the criticisms, my prior likes, dislikes, and criticisms of my own, remove them and focus on the movie for what it is. Yep. And it's only for what it is. And for myself, it's not remain neutral, really. It is, but it's mainly like remain pure and just my enjoyment of Star Wars, and then just go. Yeah. And that, like, I did what the lesson today. I did what the lesson is from the movies. Focus creates your experience. Yeah. It's the lesson I got.
I love the lesson that all the lessons that Qui-Gon has, but the one thing that I think I took away from very specifically this rewatch was kind of like from Shmi, and not necessarily that anything is said, but just like the thing I took away is that it's always bigger than just you. Mm-hmm. And how she is able to let go of Anakin, and even not even just let go, like push him, like not push him out the door, but push him in the right direction, push him on the right path. And it's like that path in no way benefits her. It honestly only brings her pain and suffering. Right. But she is convinced, and we know that it doesn't go the way that she hoped it would. She's not around, to know that Qui-Gon dies, but she knows that when she is watching Anakin leave, she is watching Anakin leave with Qui-Gon Jinn. That is the path she sees, and that is not the path that Anakin ends up taking or Qui-Gon ends up taking in the very end. But that's not the point. Yeah, it's she sees the path and she believes in that path, and she puts that path for her son before herself because she believes it is so much bigger. She knows that it is so much bigger than just her getting off of Tatooine.
It's awesome because she didn't worry about what could happen that could be bad. Mm-hmm. You know, she didn't worry about what could happen that's good for her son and not good for herself, or bad for her son and bad for herself.
He could take off, and the Starship could explode right there. We won't. You don't know that. You know, that's a horrible way, you know, to live your life, or to expect anyone to live their life. So it's better to, you know that they tried. You know, they tried to walk down a certain path that would have brought them, you know, whatever type of success or enlightenment that they could possibly get. And so that's what I took away from that most recent one, is just how selfless and powerful Shmi is, and how she understands how everything is so much bigger than just her. You know, it's a whole galaxy, and they understand, you know, they have access to the galaxy. We don't have access to this galaxy.
What's really cool is that her focus, she, like, what I chose to say about what I learned or remembered and whatever got most deeply out of this film inherently has to do with why Shmi can do what she did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's mostly going to be it. There's just two things I kind of want to wrap up with, like
to balance. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Why she did what she did is ultimately why beings like her and Qui-Gon can focus. Well, it's like, it's relatable.
Yeah, I mean, it all kind of ties back together, and, like, you know, kind of going back to what we said, is like, she's more Jedi than like a lot of the Jedi are. So that's why I mean, that's again why she became my favorite character of this whole movie. I just kind of want to see, how do you feel like this? I feel like this movie ties in so well to the entire saga. I mean, even I think maybe a little bit less with something like Rogue One, but definitely Solo. We get a huge tie-in with this, and we're starting to see it more tie-in with like the shows as well. But like, I think, you know, going from episode 1 to episode 9, and we have basically the rise and full fall of Palpatine across 9 movies, and we kind of see him, you know, go away in some of these movies. You know, we don't really see him at all in episodes 4 or 5. We don't see him in episode 6 and 7 and 8. But, you know, we see this fall and rise of Palpatine, and we do see that this whole saga is essentially becomes like the Skywalkers versus the Palpatines. So, how do you feel like it fits in, you know, with the greater saga at large?
It's the spark for I'll just say hope, because it fits the narrative of every movie. But I could go way deep, way specific on that, because it's the spark for hope, but like, it requires Padme's type of willpower for herself, the people in the prequels, and then the rebels, and then the resistance to do what they need to do. And it's also the catalyst for like conflict and like epiphanies on a galactic scale. Like, we shouldn't do these things, you know, in one movie. It's like, it's the perfect foundation setter, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is the ultimate kickoff. I think it, you know, in the same way, I think that A New Hope and The Force Awakens do a really good job of setting off and kicking off their trilogies. I think this one kicks off the saga.
Oh yeah,
so well.
Yeah.
You know, again, we've gone over kind of the issues. You know, maybe Anakin could have been a little bit older in this movie. Maybe certain things could have been a little bit better in this movie. That's every movie ever made. You know, I think it's kind of silly to dwell on how a movie could have been perfect versus how great it already is. Yeah,
dwelling is the opposite of healthy focus. Right?
Yeah, you know, it's a lack of it's a hyper focus that really is just a lack of focus. But yeah, it's one of those things of yeah, I think this sets the stage perfectly for every film, you know, because this is the origin of Darth Vader, and I think Darth Vader is so pivotal. Even in the sequels, Darth Vader is so pivotal because we have Kylo Ren that is trying to live up to Darth Vader and cannot do it. You know, we see just the arc of Darth Vader rising into the dark, or I should say falling into the dark, and then being he's trying to do good, but he's constantly being pulled in by the dark, and then he's fully enveloped into the dark in the original trilogies, but then we see him pull into the light, and then in the sequel trilogy we see his grandson that is trying so hard to be in the dark but is being pulled into the light, and it makes this really good, like, basically W shape.
It's perfect.
Yeah,
I dare say it's perfect. The inability to stay pure and the inability to fall, even if his will wants it.
Yes, it is.
Anakin and then Ren.
Yeah, it is such a good, like, the prequels and the sequels. We obviously have this meat of the original trilogies that I think
Luke was bad. Luke looked like he had the ability to do either.
Yeah, he kind of is this, like, almost like teetering thing. He's not really falling one way. He wants to do good, so I'd say he probably falls a little bit more to the light.
Of course,
but he's being pulled, I think, equally in each direction. He kind of like we say, he has Obi-Wan on one shoulder and Darth Vader on the other, telling him to go one way or the other, and he knows Obi-Wan is right, but he wants to. There's part of him that wants to help his father.
I think if he was a slave and as disrespected as Anakin was, and had this hope that could never happen in saving his mother and Padme, and not just a boy who had farm chores and couldn't just go straight to with his friends to fly planes.
Yeah,
he had that type of home life problems, but it's nothing in comparison to, like, Anakin.
Yeah, and this is, we'll kind of wrap it up here, just talking about Luke a little bit.
It's blinding.
I'd have to double check on some of, like, the current canon, but we are never told that Luke is poor. He's a moisture farmer. He may not like his life.
I never realized how lucrative that must be on Tatooine.
Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I'd have to do a little bit of digging on that. But he does have a T-16 Skyhopper. He has an Incom speeder. He has an Incom, like, Skyhopper. He has his own speeder that he can get to and from Mos Eisley on. And he clearly has a facility that can maintain droids. So, it doesn't look like it is a lavish lifestyle, but it doesn't look like, we don't have any confirmation that he's necessarily poor or struggling. We see that he's struggling personally with his life, and maybe he wants to go join the Empire, all that stuff. But he has an aunt and uncle who love him very, very clearly. Yes, his uncle can be a little hard on him, but it's very different from the upbringing that Anakin had.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Anakin had a mother who loved him more than anything, but he was surrounded by the slave trade, basically, and he was owned by Watto, whereas Luke had none of that. And he had some say, it seems like, on the moisture farms to how things went, but it seemed like Uncle Owen had the last say.
That's typically just being a child in a family.
Yeah, he's a young kid.
You don't tell your parents what you can do with the chores and tasks you're assigned.
Exactly.
So, also, I had a question: do people typically call him a poor farm boy? Because I know poor is usually easily thrown on top of farm boy.
Yeah, which it's it's I can't. Again, I need to do more research. I probably will, and see what the financial status of the Lars homestead was. But yeah, I think regardless of the financial situation between the Skywalkers and the homesteads were, Luke seemed to have it better than, or it was very apparent Luke had it better than Anakin did. And I think that did help, sway his decisions, to go see Ben and leave with learning it was Obi-Wan the whole time, and then what the things happened to his aunt and uncle. Yeah, I mean, he has horrible things happen to him, and he takes it in a completely different direction than Anakin does. So it is interesting to see that just all of the different parallels and intersections that all of the main characters kind of have. Even when it comes to, like, Kylo Ren and Ben Solo, as well as Rey. it's just so interesting how it all ties together.
It is, and it's I like to think about how it wasn't really even to shout out to Choco again, like I'm talking about unconscious bias. This is to me an unconscious beauty, because like I don't think we all obviously know Ryan Johnson, J.J. Abrams, and George Lucas did not direct these in the same room talking about every single thing that's going to happen. Right. And so like the flowing of the writing actually ends up fitting in a really nice way.
It has a really nice harmony to it.
Mm-hmm.
All of the movies, they all have different themes, different moods, and different atmospheres overall, but they all flow together in a really unique harmony. And I think that's what's so cool about all of the movies. And we see these similarities, we see these repeated themes, and we see just lots of really cool stuff throughout the entirety of all of them. So yeah, I think episode 1 is such a great kickoff overall. I'm excited to see episode 2 again. Because again, just I've got friends that have such a unique perspective on episode 2 and how it's their favorite Star Wars movie. It's always been my least favorite, so I'm interested to see going in with kind of like a fresh pair of eyes how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, this was fun.
It was very fun.
Where can we find you on all the internets?
On Twitch TV, I do challenge runs in video games. Specifically, right now, Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. Sometimes I do games streams that are just I go live and hang out and play a game. But typically, I have right now I'm doing a lot of Sekiro. I'll be playing Elden Ring when that comes out after I've done enough of my alone time with it. Twitch TV and YouTube, where I actually make more structured videos. And I have a TikTok. Not super active. It's not very active, but I have TikTok. Oh, and an dead Instagram. It's actually it's just doing its own thing, hanging out. Instagram. So Higomoss27. You can Google search it, I guess.
Nice.
Yeah. What about you?
Mostly active on TikTok at Forward Into the Black. On this Twitch channel, this is basically all I'm doing on the Twitch channel right now. I always tell myself I'll get back into streaming one day. I don't know if that'll ever happen.
Yeah, I understand the non-appeal for it's live streaming.
It's hard. Maybe we'll see where it goes from here. But yeah, also YouTube on this will be moving from YouTube at Forward Into the Black to the Rogue Council YouTube channel next week. Now that we have trying to get everything set up properly. YouTube is being YouTube. But yeah, we will see you guys potentially in another 2 weeks talking about episode 2, Attack of the Clones.
Yes.
Thank you guys for watching. Thanks for everyone who tuned in. Thanks for everyone who's on the TikTok live sending likes. For Light and for Life, may the Force be with you.